Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last day of the ASEAN Conference on Policy and Governance for Climate-Smart Land Use. From a challenging start last Tuesday, caused by the global technical glitch of MS Teams, to a very productive session yesterday, we can say we have indeed come a long way. In behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank everyone for the patience and for the active participation and for staying on up until today. We have so far 59 attendees and attendees for today. We hope the others will be joining us pretty soon, so that we will be able to have a very productive discussion. So for the time being, I would like us to run a survey so that we will be able to gauge participants' level of learning as well as of enthusiasm on our topics today. So our technical team is posting or will be posting a link on the chat box again, like the last time. Just click on the link and answer 2 questions that we have pre-prepared for you. I will give you 2 minutes to access the link and to answer the questions. For those of you who are unable to see the link on the chat box, just go to your browser, type www.menti.com and use the code 3206-3261, as you can see in the slide here. So I'll give you 2 minutes. Technical team, kindly play some music while our participants are accessing our survey. Thank you. Okay, can we ask our technical team to show the Menti results in our slide now? Let's see how many are already here, or many have already answered our Menti survey. We have currently 31 people. So let's wait for the others. We are 68 people here strong. So for the others, please kindly log on. I'll go to menti.com. There's an instruction there up front and use the code 3206-3261. At the same time, you can also access the survey by clicking on the link that's provided on the chat box. So for those of you who have not yet answered, please do so. Let's wait a little bit and a little bit of music now, so that we'll be able to encourage more to actually answer our survey. So I'll give you roughly 30 seconds more. Okay, it does seem now that around 40 people or 40 participants have already joined out of the 72. I hope the others will still join this poll, but let's take a look at how the responses go. So the first statement is, I learned a lot from the conference and I can use this learning in my work. Our average currently is at 4.1, leaning towards strongly agree. So I think our conference organizers are very happy with this result, because we're seeing that people here are saying that they actually learned a lot from the conference in the past 2 days, and they will be able to use this learning in the work that they do on a daily basis. Okay, let's take a look at the second statement. So the second statement is, I am inspired to do more in the area of climate smart land use. Oh, it's amazing. We have the same average at 4.1, leaning again towards strongly agree. Excuse me. So I think, again, the conference organizers will be happy with this, because I think apart from providing participants insights and learning for their work, the conference has actually also inspired them to do more. Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining our survey. But this time around, I would like us to, the technical team, to show us the different boards produced by Tika yesterday from our discussion. Okay, so I would like you to take a look at the boards. I'll look at the boards. I'll show the boards at least for around 30 seconds or so. And can you please type on the chat box, what is it that you see was very compelling, whether it's a word, a phrase, or illustration? Use your chat box and then write there, what are those things that you see as compelling? or meaningful or very insightful or something that hits you to the core. Okay, we have from Phil Rice, Norby again. Thank you, Norby, for being very participative. It's agroforestry is linked to food security. And then we also have Elson saying, raise local knowledge. How about the others? Oh, Dr. Yuvatane is saying multi-stakeholder strategy. Do we have more? Okay, we have from Malaysia, from the Department of Agriculture, Rafea, collaboration with all key stakeholders. Anything else that you see compelling there, meaningful, insightful, inspiring? You have their cross-country learning. I think this is something that was also highlighted by one of the speakers yesterday in the first parallel. Multi-stakeholder strategy, polycentric approach, empowerment of local communities, harmonization in all aspects, inclusiveness. Oh, that's very nice. Now, how about taking a look at the second illustration that Tika produced for us? Okay, take a look. We have a comment here from Hanoi. We are so impressed with this event and expect to become an official member of the network. Please guide us to join the ASEAN community network soon. Thank you in advance. Oh, Norby said there's emission reduction of CO2. Are there other things that you see here as, okay, we have climate risk reduction. Thank you. Anything else that you find really compelling? We have Harris from Mardi. CSLU is the integration between CSA and RED Plus. System level, enhanced productivity and climate risk reduction. We have zero waste, zero emission, direct seeded rice system, CSA guidelines. Thank you very much, everyone. We have the next slide. Again, climate smart village from our plenary speaker yesterday. Okay, this one now is the where we had our civil society organizations and local government as well as national government speakers sharing about how they engage marginalized groups in policy development and implementation. Let's see, what are those things that stuck in your mind? Which among the illustrations here do you consider, or which among the words or phrases here you consider as something which is your major key takeaway in that session? Okay, we have Elson saying, supporting their roles as custodians. Nice. Engaging women in decision-making. Engaging women in decision-making. Oh, 3 people are actually saying that. That's very, very meaningful to at least a lot of people then. We must give attention to marginalized stakeholders, identify the stakeholder, provide a safe space, norms and regulation. Very nice. We also have indigenous people, poverty reduction in line with the CSA guidelines and interactions. Okay, how about the next slide? Actually, we had a lot of discussion yesterday. Oh, we have empowerment, interactions. Let's show the next slide. This is the presentations from the parallel sessions. If you remember, we had 3 parallel sessions yesterday, one on youth, one on community-led or community-based or participatory practices in climate smart land use, and the other one is on women and business. Okay, engagement of all actors from Doc Iwatana, we have from Doc Chris, use of technology, from Ken Nguyen, from traditional to modern. Yeah, because the youth session actually yesterday highlighted the use of technology, more particularly ICT, right? Use of tech in agriculture, young researchers, youth, yay! Because according to a lot of studies, the farming population, for example, is actually declining in terms of, sorry, it's a predominantly old population. So young researchers contributing data for policy making, smart technology, young researchers, next generation. It's really inspiring. Actually, yesterday it's really inspiring to see that young people are actually engaging in these types of discussions. And the last one is here is youth are the ones who are very innovative and thus should be given more opportunities. I agree. I definitely agree. Women play a key role in food production. Do we have more? Do we have one more slide? Oh, not anymore. So those are the three that we're showing you today. And thank you very much, everyone, for your active participation by typing the things that you see as very, very important and critical and meaningful and insightful from the illustrations that Tika produced for us yesterday. Now, I will attempt at summarizing the key points coming from yesterday's conference before we move forward towards the theme for day 3. Well, yesterday's discussions actually reminded me of how the United Nations defined the concept of social inclusion. For those of you who are following the social inclusion literature, it says there that it is actually the process of improving the terms of participation in society, particularly for people who are disadvantaged, through enhancing their opportunities, access to resources, voice, and respect for rights. I think this has been the central theme of yesterday's discussion. Ms. Diburi, for example, highlighted the role of capacity building for women, thus improving their capabilities so that they'll be able to effectively participate in natural resource management. In the same way, if you remember Ms. Erkana, she also advocated for the rights of indigenous people to customary lands and respect for indigenous knowledge in framing resource management policies and practices at the local and national levels. Also yesterday, the discussions also explored once again the role of governance, which was our main theme in day 1. Mr. Riego of the Philippines and Mr. Martin of Malaysia discussed how their respective local and national governments are ensuring a diverse range of voices and stakeholders in policy and programs, including ultimate end users or beneficiaries of marginalized communities in planning, implementing, and monitoring natural resource management initiatives. When we go into the parallel sessions, if you can still remember, the parallel sessions also provided deeper insights into the topics of participation and inclusion of people and marginalized groups. They showcased how empowering different stakeholders or groups to participate in decision-making helps achieving more impactful results. This was evident in the example for example, in the example of how women business leaders are promoting inclusive and environmental responsible businesses. Also in about how young people use technology to contribute more meaningfully to environmental conservation and climate change advocacies. And also in community-led and managed initiatives for climate smart land use. We thank all the speakers yesterday and the parallel session hosts for the insightful discussions and for bringing these issues to the fore. As what Hannah Reuter has mentioned in the opening plenary when she discussed the overall structure of the conference, the question on how to mobilize finance across the different discussions since day 1, the keynote speaker, Mr. Danush Dinesh, for example, highlighted the critical role of finance in achieving scale for different initiatives. They be experimental, innovative, community-driven, national-led, so that we will be able to unlock the potential of agriculture to contribute to solving the climate crisis. All throughout the first half of today, we will be listening to speakers who will expound on the role of finance and more particularly private investments in promoting climate smart land use and how to create an enabling environment to mobilize them. We have invited speakers coming from diverse backgrounds, investment firms, research institute, international NGO, private companies, and government officials to discuss their experiences and insights in using private investments to promote public good, especially within the context of climate change. Okay, I would like to invite our audience to write their questions or speakers in the chat box, and we will deal with those during the question and answer portion of this program. But very quickly, let's just take a look at how the program looks, how our program looks today. Technical team was, yeah, that's our team. Next, please. And this is how it looks like. We'll have a plenary session. We no longer have a parallel session today. We have 2 plenary sessions before we go into the closing plenary and the reflection session, and finally the closing program. And just a quick just a quick brush through of the conference rules. We have here, of course, renaming your ID into organization, your name and the country. Regarding picture taking, you know that. Microphones are muted by default, and if you would like to participate in the discussion, please use the chat box. Next, please. No simultaneous translation, we know this already. And all presentation of the speakers will be provided to you after the conference. We will send these resources to your registered email addresses. So if you'd like to tweet, share in your social media accounts, please use the hashtag ClimateSmartASEAN. Okay, so I was just checking to make sure, sorry, I'm checking our back channel just to make sure that we have all the speakers with us today. Okay, our first two speakers, and I will introduce them in one go because they will be sharing the presentation slot together. We'll speak about the role of private investments for promoting climate smart solutions in agriculture and forestry. Mr. Paul Steele is a chief economist shaping sustainable markets of the International Institute for Environment and Development, or IIED, where he focuses on financing for the SDGs and incentives for an inclusive green economy. He spent 8 years with the United Nations Development Program and the United Nations Environmental Program in Bangkok, so he's not new to the region, working with ministries of finance in Asia Pacific on climate and development finance and budgeting. Mr. Steele holds an MSc in Environmental Economics from the London University and a BA in Politics, Philosophy and Economics from Oxford University. The second speaker who will be joining the same speaking slot as Mr. Paul Steele will be Dr. Aidi Halimanjaya. He is the director and founder of the Data Institute Indonesia. Sorry, Dala Institute Indonesia. She's an all-around policy researcher and development expert with international leadership experience. Her research interest focuses on the global distribution of climate mitigation finance and its effectiveness. She has a decade of combined international experiences in research, monitoring and evaluation, organizational development, social entrepreneurship, and innovative leadership. She holds a PhD in international development from East Anglia, an MSc in public administration from the Erasmus University, and a BA in economics from the Pajajaran University, Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Steele and Dr. Halimanjaya.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the presenters for inviting us on to your conference. And I hope our slides are going to be projected by the conference. Maybe you could put our slides up, please. Thank you. So just to give a bit of introduction, because I think we have a relatively long amount of time for this session, and hopefully we can have some questions and answers. I was fortunate enough to join the Conference of Parties in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago, as some of you may have also been there or followed on virtual links, because much of the conference was hybrid. But frankly, I came back considerably radicalized by my experiences there. I mean, as we all know, there's about 7 years to go to really address climate change seriously, and the window is closing fast. So while some great commitments have been made, you know, time is really, frankly, running out, and it's only by pressure from particularly the young people that we're really going to get governments and the private sector to change. So I hope no one takes offense from our presentation, but I do think we need to become radical. It's no longer time for business as usual to really address the climate crisis and essentially ensure that the human race survives in its current format. Next slide, please. So our overview is to present, we've been asked to discuss what is meant by climate smart agriculture. So we want to give, again, a relatively radical definition, at least it may be to some people on this call, not perhaps all, but one that focuses on indigenous people, small-scale farmers, and organic agriculture. And we see this as core to what is meant by climate-smart agriculture. Secondly, we want to discuss some of the damaging incentives which prevent these aspects of climate-smart agriculture from going forward. And then Heidi, with her deep personal experience of working in Indonesia and Malaysia, will present on those two countries. And I'm sure Heidi can explain herself, but she literally spends time walking around forests and plantations in Indonesia and Malaysia and remote parts of the country to really see the difference between the grand commitments in places like Glasgow and Jakarta and Kuala Lumpur, and what actually happens on the ground where these things are meant to be implemented. And we take these countries not to offend anyone or to draw attention, but because they're two of the key countries in terms of forests, but also I'm sure the same issues apply across Southeast Asia. So again, this is not meant to offend anyone, but just to be honest about the real problems facing the region, as well as many parts of the world. Africa, I mean, the UK, we wiped out our forests long ago, so we're just as culpable as, in fact, more so than Southeast Asia. And then we end, and I'll pick up the final slide if you want, Heidi, on recommendations. Next slide, please. So indigenous people, and I'm sure you would have discussed this already, and frankly, this is something you often hear about. You know, you see indigenous people turning up in their traditional dress at key global events. But it did strike me, particularly in Glasgow, that this is not just about, you know, a kind of cliche that indigenous people understand environmental and climate smart agriculture at most, but it really is a truism that unless we understand and appreciate the way they approach nature and climate, we're essentially doomed, as I said. And again, it's a truism, but just to repeat it, I think it is absolutely fundamental to really take this to heart, although we may have heard it before, but to really think through its consequences. Land was most socially and environmentally productive during the period of hunter-gatherers. And some of those, frankly, extraordinarily still exist in ASEAN, thanks to the remaining bits of forest and the fact that these groups do still exist. And we all, I'm sure you all know of cases. I've just quoted the example of Siberut Island off Indonesia, where the Mentawai people, who we have a picture here of, but there are peoples in Papua New Guinea, and I'm sure peoples in other parts of Southeast Asia that you're aware of do still exist. And then I want to just draw attention to, if you like, the role of my own antecedents, if you like, in terms of wiping out, or at least starting the process of wiping out these people's culture. And I think I was thinking about the legitimacy of myself as what is, we're increasingly having discussions about diversity and gender, and how the link between diversity and gender and environment and climate destruction. And people are making the obvious point, but again, I do think it does need to be made. And I was again quite struck by this in Glasgow, that it was literally white men under the colonial period who began the process of socially and environmentally destructive land use. And I just give an example here of the massacre of the Banda Island population by Dutch colonial white men who wanted to control the global nutmeg trade. So this happened across the world, but also in Southeast Asia with the Dutch, the British, the Portuguese, and so on. Typically, they were men, and they were of European or origin, and then this is obviously independence was great. but these kind of approaches and views of indigenous populations has carried on post-independence in many respects, although in some cases their situation has improved, but still they've been subject to many limits and controls on their land use and their rights. But we'll come back to that later. Next slide, please. So this is the second thing we want to focus on. I mean, again, I know you've had some presentations on this, but just to stress that small-scale farmers are the majority of farmers in ASEAN. And if you want to talk about the private sector, which is our remit here, although as you see, we're casting the net quite widely, the majority of the private sector is in fact the small-scale farmers, particularly female farmers who may not get enough focus in the policy, because typically most policies are designed by men, again picking up the gender theme, but both male and female farmers in ASEAN are the majority, the small-scale farmers. But as you know more than me, they lack the finance, they lack the land rights, and in many cases they lack the technology to really fulfill their capacities. So ASEAN governments and large-scale private sector also need to provide an enabling policies to support these small-scale farmers. I mean, again, that's a bit of a truism, but putting that into practice so that those small-scale farmers can really contribute to climate-smart agriculture is the challenge, and I would turn to you as experts to see how that can be done and what success you've had in achieving that. Next slide, please. Then the third dimension we want to stress in terms of how we see climate-smart agriculture is that the organic area is that all countries really need to shift to organic agriculture to move away from heavy inputs, which are bad for the water, bad for the soils, and also have excessive emissions, and so are bad for the climate. But from this map, it's a little bit old, but I'm sure the figures haven't changed substantially. This is, I think, from the ASEAN Times. The figures are almost basically in no country. I mean, Philippines has got just under 2% organics, but basically in pretty much, that's the maximum, 1.6. So you see the amount of organic agriculture in Southeast Asia is frankly tiny. Again, this is not to point fingers, it's the same in almost all parts of the world. But I do think we need to have a massive shift to organic agriculture to achieve the kind of reduction in emissions we need to survive. Next slide, please. Then coming on more to the economics of this is, again, to make some obvious points, but just to flag this up, damaging land use is driven by both demand and supply incentives. We know, those of you who are listening who are from private sector backgrounds, obviously you respond to the demand from the consumers, and if the consumers want unsustainable climate damaging products, then it's difficult for you to change your supply chains. But hopefully consumers are starting to shift in demand as awareness grows, demand for more climate smart and environmentally friendly and fair trade products, and we're starting to see that. I mean, the shift towards vegetarian diets and veganism, which we're seeing in the West and even I'm sure in Southeast Asia, I think will grow as people realize the importance of moving away from excessive or even any form of meat consumption, which is unsustainable for climate emissions. Then the other source of supply is private financing institutions, particularly we flag up the role of banks. Obviously, if banks are funding climate damaging activities. ID will flag up the shift to some of the more damaging commodities, unless those are financed. The banks are providing finance which is climate smart, then it's difficult for governments to really regulate these activities. And then finally, governments subsidize environmentally and climate smart and climate damaging activities. They'll provide subsidies for activities which lead to deforestation and that may be originally because they want to increase exports and increase their GDP. So it may have an intended, the intention may be good in terms of the broader economy. But again, as we start to realize how vital and existential the climate crisis is, governments need to start reforming these subsidies in a way that initially doesn't harm the poor people, and particularly poor women and small-scale farmers, who I already alluded to, but gradually transition them in what was called in Glasgow the just transition to climate-smart commodities and products. And these incentives, as I said, both outside, in many cases, the incentives are being driven by markets in the West, in Europe and the US and Japan and so on, the Southeast Asian exports, and the financing may be coming from banks such as Chinese banks or banks from OECD countries, but also increasingly they're coming from within ASEAN institutions. And as I said, these are driving socially and environmentally damaging land use. But hope gradually, as I said, as the realization is growing about climate change, these banking institutions and these consumer demand will change. Next slide, please. This is a slightly specific recommendation, but I do think it's important because there is growing. This was a hot debate in Glasgow, the whole issue of what is called carbon offsets, where, for example, let's be close to home, a British oil company like BP or Shell wants to reduce their emissions by, let's say, planting trees in Laos or Indonesia or Malaysia or Thailand. That is the rationale for that in terms of the private sector is it's cheaper for the Shell or BP to plant trees in Southeast Asia than it is to reduce their emissions in the UK or in some of their international oil fields or gas fields. Now, we have, based on a number of emerging findings, said that this is not necessarily a good approach, although it may sound initially attractive. So we say that excessive emission reductions through offsets by afforestation may not be socially and environmentally good. And we might want to debate this in the question and answer session, but we give, I think it is 6 reasons for why this is not such a good idea. First of all, it displaces indigenous people in many cases. Secondly, as you'll be aware, those of you who work in this area, often there are non-traditional species planted, so it's bad for biodiversity, and some of the fast-growing species are very, like eucalyptus, have very high demands in terms of water and so on. There tends to be weak monitoring and enforcement, so often the trees die fairly soon. There needs to be, related to this is limited maintenance of the plantations. So, and then the transaction costs of all the monitoring and enforcement required to ensure that the tree planting is effective may actually be greater than the efficiency gains of the emission reductions. So basically the perceived benefits of this approach may be outweighed by their costs of enforcement and monitoring. And then perhaps most importantly, it's all very well for BP and Shell to do this, but if all the oil companies and all the gas companies and all the coal companies in the world tried to do this approach to reduce their emissions rather than actually moving away from fossil fuels as they should be doing, then there wouldn't frankly be enough land in the world, let alone in Southeast Asia, for all the trees that would need to be planted to offset emissions. And this is based on a recent article that came out in the well-respected Nature journal. So basically, afforestation through carbon offsets cannot be taken as a replacement for what is basically crucial, which is reducing emissions by fossil fuel sources. Next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Heidi to pick up here, and then I'll come back for the last slide, Heidi. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for a great reflection. And I also agree, 7 years, it's very short. This reminds me that 7 years, it's the time that I take for studying. And at that time, when I finished study, I just realized I haven't done anything. So if we just have 7 years and we have some time to learn and to take actions, I think we need to very much do the calculation and the time management wisely. Otherwise, at this point, I already also feel that this is pinching the activities that I do in daily basis, because the weather, it's becoming very extreme. So just continuing looking into this slide, I just take a shot here about the, the land use overview on agriculture and forest. And actually, this is not about explaining the graphs, but all the time, every time I see the graph of forest and seeing, oh, it's such a still high forest in the country, or the land share used as a forest is still high, I always raise the questions, because every time I go to forest areas, it's becoming at the different view. So in this graph, yes, there are some countries, for example, our DPR and Brunei still has a high forest as land use, and in some areas, agriculture, it's still very high. Also, it shows that agriculture and forest sectors are still a dominant economic drivers for ASEAN countries. But if this is becoming shorter and shorter and diminish, then where to which sectors that ASEAN will rely on? That's also a big question mark. And if that the sectors or the forests are limited and the land is limited, again, the reflection question, to which sector we need to move on. Because then, as Paul mentioned earlier, afforestation and the carbon offset is it may not be a good option. Next slide, please. So this also a little glossary of policy of land use financing in ASEAN. There are a couple of monitoring I did for these policies. For example, implementation of sustainable reporting for companies, and I see the gap of what is what is stated in the report, the challenges, and how is it possibly happening on the ground. And I can say it's a huge gap, because most of these reporting and policies, it's a self-voluntary reporting. It's not audited. So we don't know whether what is reported is what really happening on the ground. So in that sense, policy monitoring and impact assessment is becoming a very key in these 7 years to come, because otherwise people can make commitment, but nothing is really happening according to what is committed. Again, I want to make it very clear, this is not to be offensive, but this is what I see from the evidence collection I did with monitoring and impact assessment in the past 7 years. And there are also great initiatives that is coming out, like green and sustainable bonds, and it's actually generating the use of public private finance from different sources, and where the government is paying the interest rates. It's a part of how to leveraging public private investment using public funds. And also there are different kinds like co-financing and public-private partnership framework being developed. To what extent this has been extensively helping the government to basically fundraise the amount that is needed, as it's already now approved by the CMA and COP, that every country has needs to respond to their NDCs, and that 100 billion commitment has not yet been achieved. I involved in the UNFCCC need determination report, and basically the collective needs of the climate finance reach about more than 5 trillion US dollar until 2030. So meaning the financing and policies into how is it basically implemented need to be much clearer. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is some examples, even in a more granular approaches of some countries. Um, and there are good examples. For example, the interrelated policies to finance, expedite financing, and to make it financing much more implementable. Say, for example, clear land allocation policies in law DPR is actually helping the government and also the investors to have certainty in terms of finance deployment. And some multi-stakeholders dialogues, as this conference has already coming up as one say like key points. It's important not only for the land use, but also for the financing, the enabling conditions for the financing deployment to take place, and to have the service providers and financial institutions to reduce their risk for their lending. And monitoring, it's becoming, as I mentioned earlier, key, and Singapore has begun to monitor and report carbon stars and fluxes. And it would be great to basically learn from this initiatives. In Indonesia, the government has started this sustainable financing institution and roadmap, and it takes place in also other ASEAN countries. It started since 2015, and it's evolving now into taking more different types of financing institutions beyond banks. And the trend is toward mainstreaming this into financial market, and have the classifications of what mentioned by the green projects in the upcoming years to come. Next slide, please. So going into the case studies, the overview of land use in Indonesia and Malaysia. So I did this case studies for, again, monitoring of a CDP project on sustainable banking. So that the approach is taking Indonesia and Malaysia, just because that there are some big financing share goings for palm oil and plantation uh, lending. So Indonesia in ASEAN has been in the center for the deforestation, although the graphic is now slowing down. uh, and the economic activities, it's still driven in by land use. And there are three crops and harvested crops that have a big contribution in the land use in Indonesia. So just for examples are the palm oil, the coffee, rubber, and cassava that are managed by small holders rather than big corporations. While the commodities that are managed by big corporations are primarily palm oil and timber for pulp and paper. Uh, and the local communities are struggling over land use and sustainable forest management because the classification of the concessions has been done a few decades ago without proper much consultation. And there are some overlapping problems on the ground. So that land concession size is increasing, so around 4% in 5 years. And also that the contribution in concessions at amount of 22.3 million hectares. That's according to Change Research 2019. So that this is allocated to large concessions, and also recently that there are actually criticism on the expansion of this concession in Papua for a use of the palm oil sector. Next, please. So compared to Indonesia, in Malaysia, there is a huge there is some deforestation issues, although it's much less. And land use in Malaysia is dominated by forest sector and also agriculture. And in terms of agriculture, the over there is over 75% of cultivated land. And there are some land disputes and conflict and land claims, but however, that is much less compared to Indonesia. While in Malaysia, I think the problem, if we are discussing about the financing institutions topic related to land use, it's the disclosure of the labor issues in Malaysia, rather than the overlapping potential land disputes, for example. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just to show that there are a trend towards similarities across ASEAN countries and perhaps beyond Indonesia and Malaysia for the use of instrument in land use sector. In forestry, of course, a huge share using loan, and there are also some revenue sharing and revolving fund where the basically in the revolving fund, the fund remains available to finance an organization continue its operation without any fiscal year limitation, because the organization replenished the fund by repaying the money used from the account, and it seems this is the most sustainable way. However, the implementation of this such facility is, or the development, it's pretty slow, and it doesn't take much yet the share of financing compared to loan scheme. And also this revenue sharing, say like revenue sharing with that return the benefit to the community based on the harvest activities. It takes place, but again, it's not as huge as loan scheme, and perhaps that the revenue might be difficult to reach equity and equal opportunity basis, just because of the power relation on the ground. In agriculture, there are different types, and we find Sharia and Islamic financing become one of the opportunities and growing trend, and a good examples how perhaps in Islamic finance, Islamic countries with the background as a backdrop, it's becoming crucial tools and warrant a discussion. While in other sectors, there are some bonds, credit guarantee, and collateral, which perhaps can be also explored to be used in forestry and agriculture, especially if those two are moving toward more sustainable way. Next slide, please. Okay, so I hand over the recommendations to Paul to finish this presentation.
Thanks, Heidi. And we'll wrap up now. So we have hopefully about 10 minutes for questions. So just to summarize, we've got 5 key points here. First of all, as we flagged up at the beginning, safeguarding indigenous rights. Secondly, supporting small-scale farmers and organic agriculture. Thirdly, promoting consumer demand and public and private finance that supports forest conservation. Fourthly, limiting afforestation for carbon offsets, at least once it achieves excessive levels and is not done properly. And then finally, and maybe importantly for an ASEAN audience through an ASEAN dialogue, to harmonize forestry and sustainable land use incentives through ASEAN, possibly with EU support if that's considered relevant. So we'll stop there, and I think there are already some great questions coming in, but I'll hand over to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul and Heidi, and thank you very much for the very insightful presentation. A special thanks to Paul for rising up early today. I think that's very early in the morning for you, and for joining us. So at this point, we would like to embark into a discussion. There are 2 plenary speakers and the audience. I know that, like me, there are several of you there with a lot of questions to raise. And I would like, therefore, to invite everyone to put your questions on the chat box as soon as you can, because of the limited time that we have. So in the next 15 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, I will be joined by Hannah Reuter, who will be my co-moderator for this Q&A. Hannah, please.
So, all right, sorry. Good afternoon and good morning to you, Paul. Good to see you. Good to see you, Ida. We have 2 questions from the same person, actually. So it's from Kun Margaret from Thailand, our dear ASEAN CIN chair. She has been obviously inspired by your presentations. So one question is directly to you, Ida, related to the topic of monitoring, tracking progress of action on the ground. She's asking, do you have insights on who and how this kind of auditing of implementation on the ground can be done? And let me already continue to the second question to Paul later on, also with a fresh impression from the proceedings in Glasgow. Under the UNFCCC, the ASEAN agriculture sector is negotiating under the Coronivia Joint Work on Agriculture. With the recent development on negotiation process in COP26, do you have any insights on what could be the future of the ASEAN agriculture sector under the UNFCCC? So maybe we start with Ida.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anna. So yeah, so I find the system at the moment does not include audit for sustainability report, especially done by the private sector. If we take a transferable learning from what monitoring and impact assessment has been done by the public funds, it's usually commissioned as in ad hoc basis, and or under a monitoring and evaluation team embedded to a program. So if I were asked who can do, I think my suggestion that a country should think around which body which is independent and has a technical capacity, either an institute that is working on the agriculture and forest that is commissioned to basically do this as part of the system. So not when it's asked right away, but if this audit can be integrated into a policy process, and how this, let's say, for example, the permit for doing further management of the concession can take place, it's much more how do you say it's much more based on evidence rather than based on self-claim basis. So the problem with flag T, for example, or the timber legality, there is an independent audit by an NGO. But I think this is a problem when the independent auditor can integrity will it's under question, for example. So that there should be a governance system underlying this process. So not only that this institute should be also checked by someone else and should be maintained in terms of integrity and opinion, but also that their opinion should be based on the structure that is decided by the higher authority, not by themselves. So I think that's just my quick reaction without thinking too much, but it would be great to basically have a dialogue, a policy dialogue on how basically to monitor and to make decision on the land use based on independent audit, and also that is part of the system. As we know, this is already happened in the case of financing audit for banks, for example. Like banks can only run when they hit certain performance and target. Why can not we do that when we have already urgency on having or seeing a good land use management on the ground? Because we know that we have a collapse system with economic crisis couple of times, and that safeguard that banking system with the certain standards in the Basel Accord can help. Why can't we have the same thing for land use? Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that insightful answer, says Kun Margaret, and I agree. Paul, can you give some insights again from the negotiations and what your perspective is on how ASEAN agricultural sector can continue to engage there?
Well, I sent a message to Michael as the other co-facilitator. I mean, my request was, I must confess, I'm not party to these specific negotiations on ASEAN agriculture, although it's obviously hugely important to this audience. So I don't know whether there's a way of unmuting Kun Margaret and asking her to give some background, because I'm not aware of what's been discussed and possible next steps.
So I have to answer my own question.
Such a good question.
Me and my big mouth. No, actually, because there's no decision made in the Coronivia Joint Work and Agriculture, and it's still just merely we have intersessional workshop, and there it's like a exchange of information among the parties on how we could benefit from the Coronivia Joint Work on Agriculture. So, because I was not able to go to Glasgow either, but I am a virtual negotiator, and sometimes there's a problem with connection. So it's really a difficult track, but I saw the conclusion, and again, they were saying it will be further discussed in the next Substa 57, I think, yes. So I thought you had some insights on how we could really, but actually finance is there, as Ida was saying. It's very important, the finance, the technology transfer, the capacity building. So it's very insightful for the answer of Ida about monitoring or auditing what is on the ground. because actually we are discussing on the modes of implementation of the results of the workshops, and we really need some scaling up. So it's really finding some information from experts on how we could really put forward the agriculture sector under the UNFCCC. Okay, it's okay, Paul, because I don't know either the answer. Thank you, Hannah.
But actually, Margaret, you did answer to a certain degree your own question. I think it's really about finding what the key topics are to put forward under the Coronavia agenda, right? What the ASEAN priorities are that you have been already working on and identifying in the past few years. But I don't know if you want to add something, Paul, after Margaret's explanations.
Well, I think, I mean, just to add generally, you know, obviously the dust is still settling on the on what was quite a dramatic series of events in Glasgow. It as those of you who followed it, it very nearly didn't get through, and it was all kind of down to the wire. But I think Kun Margaret has flagged up some of the key issues: finance, capacity building, technology. They're going to come up again and again. And so it's about getting finance from the north to the south. It's about making sure that finance reaches the people on the front line that ID is referring to. It doesn't just sit in the capital city, but actually reaches the small scale female and male farmers on the front line. It's about tech transfer, so making sure that everyone has access to the technology that is needed to make a just transition. And then it's about capacity building so that everyone has the ability to respond to the kind of changing incentives and auditing that ID was flagging up. So I'm sure those three themes are, I mean, they're going to play out in different ways in each country, in each location in ASEAN, but those general themes are all important.
Okay. Okay, I was really trying hard to make my microphone work. So I think in the interest of time, I guess we need to move on, right, Nico? But I just wanted to highlight that Paul and Ida are authors of the newly published status report, Investing in Sustainable Natural Capital in ASEAN. I just posted the link in the chat box and mistyped, actually I didn't mistype. Okay, so you can find the link in the chat box. Please check it out. There are many interesting findings, some of which you heard today, I believe, but you can also dig further into that topic. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and also thank you very much, Paul and Heidi, for a wonderful opening plenary and a very thought-provoking one. So thanks very much for joining us today. So in the upcoming 3 sessions, I will be joined by colleagues from Grow Asia and the International Institute for Sustainable Development, who supported the organizing team in preparing the following sessions. So this time I would like to invite Aaron Sweeney, the manager of the Sustainable Investment and Inclusion of Grow Asia, a multi-stakeholder partnership platform that catalyzes action on inclusive agricultural development in Southeast Asia. Aaron leads the implementation of the action plan for the ASEAN Guidelines on Responsible Agriculture Investments, the RAI, as well as Grow Asia's gender mainstreaming initiatives. Welcome to the conference, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Miko, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to co-moderate with you the next panel. And it's been fantastic to hear the great insights on natural capital financing from our last panelist. So I'm very glad that Grow Asia has been able to join to listen in and to bring forward speaker recommendations for the next panel. So without further ado, it would be fantastic to have our 2 panelists join us now for our next session. Will they be spotlighted now? Fantastic. So that will be with us here today, Hatakan Komansri Sakun and Ian Henderson, if they're both spotlighted. Hi, Kim, great to have you. And Ian, wonderful to see you here. It's fantastic to be here with both of you, and I'm really glad that you were able to join and willing to speak and share from your 2 experiences. So I'd love to give a little bit of background to both of our esteemed speakers for our audience here today. Haitakan Kamun Sri Sakun leads group strategy innovation and farm development for Taiwan. Cam also previously headed strategy for Tesco in Thailand and was involved in transformation initiatives at SCG, Krungsri Bank, and Deloitte. After over 10 years working in multiple industries, Cam joined Taiwan in 2019 and is currently developing analytics and bioagritech innovation for the group in Southeast Asia to build sustainability from farm to shelf. And I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Cam for the last several years on several sustainability initiatives that Taiwan is working on, which is very exciting. I'd also like to introduce Ian Henderson, who's the Managing Director for ADM Capital Climate in Hong Kong. Ian has spent over 20 years working in the finance sector in a variety of roles. After a decade working for investment banks, he decided to switch focus on sustainable finance in 2009. He has since worked on sustainable finance for WWF, the United Nations, and now for ADM Capital. He's currently focused on launching an Indonesia-focused blended finance impact fund for ADM Capital Climate, focused on sustainable agricultural commodities. He also sits on the advisory board of the Rocket Foundation and is a senior advisor on sustainable finance to UNDP. So as you can see, we have fantastic knowledge and experience on the panel here with us today. And it's my great pleasure to introduce and invite Cam to now speak and share from her experiences in her role at Taiwan. Cam, the floor is yours.
Sure, thanks, Erin. Glad to see you here again. Would it be okay if I share my slide?
Yes, you can. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, just wanted to give a brief introduction on Taiwan and what we do. I think in the prior session with Ada and Paul, we heard a little bit on supporting the small scale farmers, sustainability and organic agriculture. So just want to share some of the examples that Taiwan has been working on with the farmers in the region. But first, just a quick introduction on Taiwan. So next year we're going to be 75 years old. We are a tapioca starch manufacturing company. In Thailand, based in Thailand here, as well as we have factories in Vietnam and also a small operation in Cambodia. All around we source from Laos, from Cambodia, from Vietnam, as well as in Thailand, and we export to about 35 countries all over the world. So in terms of the initiatives, sorry. So I'm just going to get my slide going. Okay, so what's really important for us for Taiwan, because we're largely an agricultural company, being able to serve our farmers is very important. So all in all, we're looking to drive Southeast Asia's journey for sustainability to net zero, be it takes 20, 30 years. We're starting to drive on that transformation. And at the core of that journey for us is the smallholder farmers, where sustainability practices are very important. So that's what we're driving. Overall for Taiwan itself, we're looking in terms of supporting the UN SDG goals. So out of 17, we're supporting 11. Some of them includes the poverty, where we're looking to increase the farmer income, good health and well-being, education, gender equality, sustainable consumptions, production, and climate action. Just a brief overview on Taiwan again. With the local stores, we export all over the world to about 35 countries. In Europe, in Middle East, in Africa, in South Asia, East Asia, in Australia, New Zealand, as well as Southeast Asia. For us to be able to drive that whole sustainability initiative, we also need to be able to create that value for our customers as well. So what I mean is, right now we're seeing sort of a very positive trend from our customers themselves, where they're looking to source from sustainable sources. And there is, for example, the supplies of the tapioca, of the mung bean, of the rice, of the sweet potato that we're serving to the customers, they need to know where it comes from. They need to know how it's been planted, all the farming practices that's been done. And for us, a very important part of that is about innovation. And at the core for Taiwan, we strongly believe that innovation starts at ground zero. What does that mean? That means that we need to go back to the farm. We need to go back to our farmers. We need to go back to agriculture. So within the whole Taiwan universe, we have 18 agronomists, which we've built over the last 3 years, to go to each village, to go to each community within our whole farming community, within Thailand, within Vietnam, Laos, as well as Cambodia, to work with the farmers on the best farming model that will help not only increase the yield, but also promote the regenerative agriculture. So some of the things that we've done, for example, is being able to introduce new varieties or new planting techniques of the cassava crop to the farmers. We also have set up greenhouses to multiply those good cassava stems to scale and give out to our farmers. Because if the farmers are able to get access to those good variety stems, the yield will increase, and effectively the income will increase as well. We also have an ag technology team that goes out and develops ag technology in order to support the farmers. For example, we have an application where we're able to identify within Thailand and within Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam where the cassava are. But not only that, we scan the land, and we're able to find out the age of the crop as well as the health of the crop. So if any plantation area is in trouble, we deploy our agronomist team to go and advise and support those farmers just in time to be able to mitigate. That's a way to mitigate the risk in terms of output for our farmers. We also leverage our Southeast Asia farming network in order to learn from best practices from each of our farmer community and then share across the region. Because currently we have nine starch factories, and within the 9 starch factories, we also have byproducts that come out. The slush, the wet pulp, those biomasses that come out of a production. We reuse that to make fertilizers and then give back to our farmers for free. So this is, we're trying to build towards the organic biofertilizers that will support the communities as well as expand the organic plantation area within Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, and Cambodia as well. So currently, as Paul has shown previously in the previous session, I think it's quite factual. I guess reality is within Southeast Asia, the organic land is not very big. But for Taiwan, for us, we're looking to expand that because, how are we able to expand that and make it stick and sustainable? It's because we also see that the trend from the customer side, they're also demanding more organic products as well. So we're seeing double-digit, 15-20% for year-on-year for organic product. So I think this is definitely one of our strategy in order to build this farming community as well. This is an example where we said we monitor the crop scan from the sky, where we're building our own database, the soil library, the crop variety, the weather forecast, the farming profile, root availability, competitor demand and supply. At the end of the day, we are able to build a cassava yield forecasting model, and with that, we're using this tool to help the farmer increase the yield. And also we're working towards building a predictive pricing model as well, where we can advise our farmers to increase their income. How does that happen? It's because that once we see when the optimized harvesting season should be, or the day should be, we can tell the farmer that, why don't you wait about 2 months or 1 month? If you wait, your yield will increase this much and your price will increase this much, effectively increasing their income. So this is sort of the project that we're working on with some of we're currently going to be piloting in Bac province. As a new business for us as well, and also an extension of our current product, we're also going into the bioplastics business, which we're launching in Q1 next year. So basically using the starch and using the biomass from our factories to make bioplastics. And that creates the biocircular economy as well as sustainability for our communities within Thailand. So all in all, I think in terms of how we ensure that we continue to be very focused on investments, sustainable investments for our own whole group. We focus on 4 pillars. So first one is farmer, second one is factory, third one is family, and fourth one is food. So for example, all the investments that we made under the farming community, it needs to be sustainable. We invest in learning centers, we invest in creating supply chain transparency, we invest in expanding the farmer network in order to help the farmers improve the yield. So what we've done, for example, another example is we are currently working with the SAI, so Sustainability Agriculture Institute platform, to certify our farming communities on sustainable agriculture practice. We're also not working alone, but we're working with the NASDA department in Thailand in order to expand that across about 7 provinces here in Thailand. The second one, in terms of investment, we would invest in initiatives that would increase, will help bring us to zero waste, wastewater treatment, green energy, as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In terms of family and food, it's increasing the health and wellness of our communities, increasing the health and increasing the products, for our food products, to make it more healthy through expanding our R&D research capabilities. Just before I close, just wanted to this is to reiterate our own focus and our own commitment in terms of really driving the green economy for Southeast Asia. Is recently, yesterday, actually, we've just launched Taiwan Ventures, where it's our own corporate venture capital platform, where we're going to be investing in 2 or 3 startups that are going to be driving the green economy for Thailand. So we're focusing on farm agriculture, agriculture and farm innovation, B2B supply chain and analytics, bioplastics, waste upcycling, and novel ingredients, and as well as processing technology. Just as a last thought before I leave, and then we go back to Ian and Arian. Taiwan, I think we're very lucky to be in Thailand. We've been able to build a network, not only with other corporates, but we've built a network with government to get government support as well, because of the whole government policy about the BCG economy. Currently, we're working with NASDA in order to roll out the sustainability agriculture practice and training for the farmers. And this isn't going to be easy. It's going to take many years, but I think we've got really good traction, even with the local governments. Just last week, we visited 5 provinces to map out the projects and to map out the timeline, to agree the working group in order to really get these initiatives on the ground and have a very clear plan about how we're going to be helping the farmers in those 5 provinces over the next 3 years. So I think this is going to be a really long journey, but we're very excited to really embark on this and make it, hopefully make it stick. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cam. It was fantastic to hear you share about the journey that Taiwan has gone on to ensure that farmers have high quality inputs and meeting their income needs in order to create this strong supply chain for cassava across the region. And also congratulations, of course, on launching Taiwan Ventures yesterday. Very exciting. And I have a few questions for you on that. So I'd like to encourage everyone in the audience to continue to submit your questions through the chat, and we will be sure to address those questions both to Cam as well as to Ian, our next speaker. So with that, I'd like to turn directly to Ian, who is going to be sharing from his experience, of course, with ADM Capital. And Ian, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Erin, and hi everyone. Thank you for the very kind invitation to speak today. I'll just see if I can share my screen. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So what I'm going to do is actually skip through a few slides on a fund, as Erin's already mentioned, that we're looking to launch, and hopefully in the process of that, touch on a few of the guiding questions we've been asked to speak about. So as you can see there, the ADM Capital Asia Climate Smart Landscape Fund is what I'm going to be talking about. It's a new fund which provides bespoke lending solutions to Indonesian enterprises in agricultural supply chains, primarily focused on the sort of upstream and midstream enterprises. The idea is we're trying to harness two of the sort of the core strengths of ADM Capital. We've been managing money in Asia for over 2 decades, but one thing that perhaps makes us a bit of a rare animal in the investment management world is we've actually had a foundation since 2006. So what this fund really does is try and bring together the financial capabilities that have evolved over the decades, but also the networks and the technical strengths and knowledge that have evolved out of the ADM Capital Foundation. So if we could move to the next substantive slide, please. Yeah, just skip through. So as you can see here, we are primarily focused on sustainable agriculture, agroforestry, and aquaculture. And I think a key aspect is the climate and the gender impact targets or impact outcomes are baked into the fund in a manner I'll talk about in a bit more detail in a few slides' time. So if we can move to the next slide, please. What's quite interesting about this fund is it's actually going to harness a new vertical, a new business or division within ADM Capital. So as you can see on the left-hand side, those 2 gray boxes talk to the 2 different investment strategies that we currently use. In the Asia Pacific region, we focus on private credit. So this is lending directly to enterprises, traditionally those that can't access bank financing for a variety of reasons. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see we've also got a sustainable food and ag equity strategy. So here we take stakes in companies, and that's predominantly focused on OECD countries. The bottom right box talks to the foundation. And as I say, building on all 3 aspects, we're going to be launching something called ADM Capital Climate, for which this Sustainable Land Use Fund will be the first vehicle. One of the questions was what incentivized us to focus on ESG or responsible practices, and I think there's no single answer to this question. So one was actually just individuals. I mean, one of the features of the broader sustainable finance space is the story to date has been considerably one of passionate individuals grasping the opportunity and driving the agenda forward, and I think that's true within ADM Capital. I think a second piece is interest from investors. So whereas 10 years ago, people weren't asking questions, we're increasingly hearing questions from either current or potential investors about sustainability and how it impacts, both risk-adjusted returns, but also real-world impact on the ground. We're also hearing interest from portfolio companies. We're not the only people lending to them, that it's not the only thing that they do. And having a foundation and having knowledge in-house, I think, has driven quite a helpful dialogue. So that's been, I think, another sort of vector of change. And I think the other key broader issue is just this is an incredible market opportunity. And I think you just need to pick up any newspaper, or particularly the Financial Times, and you'll see ESG and sustainability all over it. And I think this is indicative of the fact that that the financial world has changed radically in the past 18 months or so. And there are literally hundreds of data points that can support that. If we move to the next slide, please. So we've obviously, as I've just alluded to, got a relatively long history of investing in the region. We've also got a foundation, which makes us a slightly unusual investment manager. But what we're doing with this fund is hopefully going to access a guarantee from the US Development Finance Corporation. So this is the left-hand side of this chart. Huge opportunities in the land use space, but one thing that's quite interesting is that the perception of risk is somewhat different to other sectors. If we compare it to clean energy or clean mobility, which I think are two of the tangible investment verticals under the sort of the broader climate change heading, people perceive the land use space as quite different. So what we found is that to get investors to show interest, we've had to offer them the comfort of effectively a US government guarantee. So it's not a done deal yet, but we've got a letter of interest and we've been in extensive conversation with them. There are all sorts of conversations and questions about the integrity of outcomes in the broader sustainable finance space. So what we're looking to do, and here I'm speaking to the right-hand side of the chart, is bring in a third-party organization that will oversee a lot of the impact. So what they'll do is they will chair the Impact Advisory Board. And the way the investment process has been structured, a transaction cannot get to the investment committee unless it first passes through the Impact Advisory Board, who determine that it meets the minimum thresholds of impact. That board will subsequently then set targets, and as I'll talk about in a second, there are financial incentives for ADM Capital to reach those targets. So if we move on to the next slide, please. We've got 3 portfolio level targets. You can see a greenhouse gas target on the left, a jobs and gender target in the middle, and a restoration target on the right. One of the guiding questions was, how do we ensure investments have positive environmental, social, and governance impact in these sectors? So I think there's a number of different answers to that question. So one is that before we try to launch the fund, which we're in the process of doing now, we spend an awful lot of time understanding the landscape of grant funding and technical assistance. Because again, one of the features of investing in this space is that the pre-investment costs, understanding the environmental and social dimensions of a potential transaction, are arguably more intensive than they are in other investment domains. So that should hopefully assist in trying to ensure that the impact is achievable and is done in an efficient and effective way. A second aspect is partnerships. I've already talked about a fund level partnership with an international organization that's going to chair the impact committee. But another element that we actually have baked into our investment strategy and is actually part of the terms of the guarantee is that every transaction that the fund undertakes has to involve a local NGO. So an NGO that understands the local dynamics, the community, the political economy, but also has worked with the borrower. I mentioned that the Impact Advisory Board will not only determine whether a transaction hits a minimum threshold, but will also set targets. Obviously, with a fund, there are financial incentives for the manager of that fund. And historically, those have been purely linked to financial performance. But what we're doing with this fund is that half of that incentive is actually linked to impact outcomes. So they'll involve the 3 impact targets you can see on the screen. But for every transaction, there'll be a more detailed set of targets and a framework and a theory of change that's developed. And the financial incentive to the fund manager will be linked to achieving those and doing it in a manner that the investment advisory board determines is acceptable. We can move to the next slide, please. So gender is a key part of our investment strategy. We're hoping both that 30% of the total number of jobs that we create, this fund creates, will be for women, and also that 30% of the borrowers will be eligible under the 2X challenge. We've recently just received an award from Convergence to help build out our gender strategy. And it's a super exciting and new area for the investment industry. So I don't think anyone pretends they know everything about how to successfully integrate gender into investment strategies, but it's certainly an area that we're massively excited about. If we can move to the next slide, please. So we've already heard about the potential impact of technology, and although the fund won't be investing in technology as a sort of standalone investment strategy, we will be harnessing it where possible. So hopefully it will bring down cost curves and will ensure the sort of the provenance and the ability to generate impact. If we can move to the next slide, please. So if we take a step back, I think the genesis for what we're doing came from an observation several years ago, and that was that in many jurisdictions across the region, there's a structural gap in the supply of finance. If you look at many of the financial jurisdictions, quite often banks play a very dominant role, and banks quite often fund themselves through deposits. And that tends to lead to a bias to shorter term lending, so maybe 3 to 5 years. And what we found years ago when we were doing a mapping of the sustainable activities that could bring about many of the sort of national development objectives across the region was that the more sustainable activities were often characterized by a need for more capital and slightly longer term capital. And the domestic financial institutions were often not necessarily structured in terms of their business model to provide this. Of course, there are more specialist development banks that are super experienced in financing these kind of enterprises. But again, what we found is the business model is obviously biased, or is often biased to slightly bigger opportunities. And where we found a structural gap was for opportunities where enterprises needed money that was perhaps longer than 5 or 6 years, and between sort of $5 and $20 million. So often it was a bit too long dated to be attractive to the domestic lenders, and it was too small to be attractive to some of the international specialist players. So if we move to the next slide, please. I've talked about a few aspects of this already, but perhaps if we take a step back and look at our journey and try and describe how an investment manager got to a point where we're focused on a climate smart fund. On the left-hand side of the chart, you can see, the slide, you can see that I think there was a growing awareness of what I've just talked about, that there was a structural gap in the market. There was demand for finance that the financial jurisdictions weren't necessarily set up to provide. So that was an opportunity. And there was also a growing awareness that I think food and agriculture systems needed to change. And I think there's all sorts of data points we can use to support that. That resulted in 2015 in something called the TLFF, the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility. And this is a partnership between ADM Capital, BNP Paribas, UNEP, and ECRAF, the World Agroforestry Center. And the idea is it was a platform to try and mobilize finance for sustainable land use and also clean energy transactions. In 2018, the first transaction took place, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And what that did was really bring about proof of concept that, you know, there was demand for flexible finance that was focused on activities that could deliver outcomes in the land use space. And as a result, we're in the process of launching a dedicated fund, which is the ASEAN Lab. So if you move to the next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of the transaction, I'll talk about this very quickly, but there's actually quite a detailed case study on the Convergence website, which is a blended finance platform if anyone's interested. But it was, as you can see on the slide, that the first corporate sustainability bond in Southeast Asia. So a bond was issued, $95 million was raised, and the proceeds were used by RLU, Indonesian corporate, on a rubber concession spanning 90,000 hectares, so roughly the size of Singapore. In a nutshell, roughly a third of the concession land was used for productive assets for planting rubber. Roughly a third was set aside for high conservation or high carbon related reasons. And roughly a third of the land was used for community purposes. There are about 50,000 community members within the concession boundary. So it's quite a complex social undertaking. And if we move to the next slide, which I won't go into in a huge amount of detail, but this just touches on some of the impact that bond created. So as you can see, there's a mix of environmental and social impact that's been created, you know, obviously not 100% due to the finance, but the finance has facilitated. So maybe in the interest of time, I can wrap up there. One of the final guiding questions was, and I'm sure we can talk about this a bit more in the Q&A, but you know, what could be done to incentivize companies or investors to embed responsible and sustainable practices and to level the playing field? And I think there's a whole range of answers to this question. You know, I think some of the key ones are just basic issues in terms of clarifying land tenure. Agricultural subsidies are an issue that comes up quite often, you know, trying to ensure that they're actually aligned with national or regional development objectives and they're dispersed in an effective and efficient way, I think is quite an important one. A big aspect that we talk about a fair bit is within the sustainable finance space, there's a lot of focus on climate and not necessarily on non-climate environmental issues or social issues to an extent. And I think it would be helpful if, you know, I think we could broaden the lens through which we think about sustainable finance to include some of these other domains, which are obviously hugely relevant in the land use space. Carbon is something we're asked about every day. I think a clear, predictable framework around how to think about carbon would be hugely useful in terms of incentivizing companies to change business models, but also trying to get more investment dollars into the space. And I think there's also another big discussion about climate finance and government money. So I think recently I read a statistic that said that 76% of all climate finance takes the forms of loans. And certainly what we found in our experience in trying to raise this fund is that other instruments like a guarantee or like grants or like a first loss tranche are actually hugely catalytic. Certainly from our perspective, more so than just a loan. So I think what would be really helpful would be a mapping, not just of what the opportunity set is, because I don't think we actually understand that particularly well. Like how big is the opportunity and what are the tangible investment verticals within that, but also trying to ensure that the supply of climate finance or sustainable finance, whatever you want to call it, concessional finance, is actually well suited to those opportunities, because at the moment, I think there are several people that might say that it's not optimized the job at hand. So maybe I'll stop there and we can open up for Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian, and thanks for both giving an overview about the structure of ADM Capital and your associated foundation, and now ADM Capital Climate, as well as what you've actually done on the ground in Indonesia. And I was especially excited to hear you highlighting what you see as some of the opportunities, particularly for public sector action to support this kind of sustainable finance going forward. So thank you for highlighting all of those aspects for those listening in today. We have about 10 minutes for the Q&A. So before I ask some of my own questions, I would like to invite anyone from the audience who does have questions to send them through in the chat. You can send them directly to myself or to my co-facilitator, Michael. You can also just put them through for everyone to see. So please do keep those coming. I wanted to, both of you highlighted a couple of really important points, particularly about how we can encourage greater private sector investment and activity into agriculture and land use projects. So Cam, I wanted to turn back to you first and really ask you about what were the factors that incentivized Taiwan to include sustainability as a kind of key aspect of what you do as a company, because of course there is an upfront cost to including that. So what is the business case for you as a company to invest in sustainable practices for your farmers?
And maybe before Cam answers that, a related question to that one, Cam, would be, what is the financial return on investment in these environmental, social, and governance practices? Is it more economically attractive as compared with others, for example? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think reality is first and foremost, it also came from sort of our DNA and what we believe from the start. Our company is 75 years old, honestly was currently its third generation of founder. And this is largely very driven by the founder that has started the company. So we really believe that sustainability and really supporting the farmers and the farming practices to increase their income is definitely the way to go. And because we believe that, and also now very fueled by the market movement where, you know, the big customers, the likes of Nestle and Unilever and Coca-Cola, these are the companies that we work with, and they've really also driven that sort of demand. So that's really created, also helped actually create the economics for us. For example, more demand on organic. We're able to source from the farmers 20-25% at a premium, but also being able to sell at a premium to our customers as well, because they're willing to pay. So all in all, it's about the end-to-end supply chain. So if it's demand driven, we're also able to get the supply side come with us as well.
Thank you, Cam, and thanks also for highlighting the importance of all the different actors along that supply chain, which links back to the partnerships that you were talking about as well, and how important that's been for Taiwan. Ian, in a similar vein, I wanted to ask you about what you're seeing in terms of investment readiness among the kind of potential investees for this Climate Smart Landscape Fund, or even the investment readiness of some of the other portfolio companies that you've worked with in the past. And particularly in terms of embedding what you're looking for in terms of ESG criteria into their business operations as Taiwan has done. What's the landscape of that investment readiness?
And also probably just an addition to that, Ian, would be how far do you see a shift in the industry, more particularly in the sector where you're in, and considering, for example, the ESG criteria in business operations and investments? Is it's still a niche now for now, or is it becoming more common?
Yeah, two very good questions. So in terms of the investment readiness question, I think it's well documented that the supply of bankable projects, to use the phrase that's commonly used, is something that is a bottleneck, or is currently a bottleneck. And certainly the investment strategy of the fund is designed to try and address that in a number of ways. I've touched on the fact that or I've alluded probably to the fact that the fund investment strategy is based around partnerships. So both partnership at the fund level, but also every transaction needs a local NGO on the ground. So one of the reasons for that is actually to ensure that potential borrowers we speak to are arguably more advanced than others, obviously depending on the partner you choose. Again, echoing the Taiwan experience, a key aspect of the projects we look at is actually the off-taker. That gives you visibility over your revenue stream and the quality of your revenue stream. And what we ideally look for in a best case scenario is an off-taker that has very strong and visible sustainability credentials, and ideally skin in the game. And what we're increasingly seeing amongst the biggest global players is not only are they visibly committed to quite bold sustainability objectives, but sometimes they can actually have a standalone pool of capital or resources to help deliver their sustainability goals. If you look at Unilever and Nestle, and I mean, even some of the tech companies do this. So I think broadly speaking, there's the partnership model is what we're really focused on. I also touched on the fact that we spent a lot of time in terms of the sequencing of this fund, focusing on trying to understand the landscape of TA facilities, technical assistance facilities that can help us understand a project. And that's a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing in that you've got a higher chance of developing impact, but in certain people's eyes, it's also a barrier because it's indicative of the fact that investments in this space are arguably a little bit more complex, or certainly different to other investment verticals across the sustainable finance landscape. So hopefully that's touched on this readiness question. So I think the short answer is, it's definitely a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. And I think that would change over time, as best practice evolves and knowledge gets out and capacity is built. In terms of the question about sustainable finance, is it a niche or is it mainstream? I'm quite pragmatic about this. I've been working in the space since 2009. It felt like we were screaming into the wind for, the first 8 or 9 years, and then the last 2 years has seen this revelation. And everyone's now jumping in on the bandwagon. I think a couple of observations. I personally think we're about to see a huge backlash. I think, in finance terms, people talk about when retail investors jump into a bull market or a rapidly rising market. And generally that's a signal where all the clever money gets out. And I think we're at a point where people are just making announcements and pledges without necessarily thinking through them in detail. So I think there's a lot of press column devoted to, the integrity of net zero pledges, for example. But I think that will be a healthy shakeout. I think sustainable finance is moving at different speeds in different parts of the world. I think Asia is probably a little bit behind Europe because we don't have the regulatory driver yet that Europe has, but that will hit us very soon. But I think within 5 years' time, we might not even talk about ESG. It would just become the norm. I think a big focus for this decade is this space, the land use space. I think people are beginning to realize that it's absolutely incomprehensible to deliver on any climate or broader development objective unless you get this space right. It is absolutely foundational. Exactly. And I think another really interesting broader trend that we'll see in sustainable finance that will really impact this space is a big question of the last decade, I think, was, does sustainability impact financial performance? So it was looking at the sort of exogenous variables, the outside environment, and the impact on the financial returns. I think a key question that will be asked and will be answered this decade is the inverse of that. What is the real world impact of the company? So I think a lot of the conversations we're having around impact, which is currently, a niche conversation within impact investing, which is itself a niche branch of sustainable finance, will be mainstream. And I think if you look at the externalities across food and land use systems, and then think about the implications of that, I think, if that focus on impact does scale up and become mainstream, it will have very profound implications. So hopefully that's...
Thanks, Ian. No, it's great. And thanks for also that kind of sensing of where we've been, but also where you see us going, especially in the land use sector. And I would also like to point out that both of your examples really highlight that Southeast Asia is a huge area of opportunity. And I'm very glad to be seeing conversations like this one happening, where we have role models in the space like Taiwan and leaders in the space like ADM Capital coming in to share your insights. So I wanted to thank you both again so much for your time, for sharing your stories, for engaging in this dialogue. It's been a real pleasure to have you. Cam, I also wanted to invite you and Ian, please, to put anything that you'd like to share with the audience directly in the chat. So for example, the announcement about Taiwan Ventures would be a great thing to share with everyone in the audience today. And I know we're a few minutes over time. So with that, I would like to just thank both of you again, thank my co-facilitator, Michael, for the opportunity to speak. And I will be responding to the question that came through in the chat directly via chat, just to save time. So thank you both again so much, and have a great rest of the session and conference. Michael, back to you.
Thank you very much, Erin, and thank you very much, Ian, and also Cam. That was a very wonderful session, and quite the kind of session that we need. So thank you for that one. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we are heading towards a 5-minute break, I should say. Shall we just have a 5-minute break instead of 10 to save time? So during the break, we will be showing you a video of Grow Asia, where Erin works, on how a multi-stakeholder task force achieves scale in sustainable coffee production in Vietnam. So my time on my watch now is 3:59. So in 5 minutes time, we'll see each other again. So see you in 5 minutes. Grab a cup of coffee, have some light bites, and then we'll proceed with the discussion after the break. See you back. See you back. See you again. Sorry. Welcome back, everyone. This time I will be joined by a co-moderator from the International Institute of Sustainable Development, who will be also be speaking in a later session on the ASEAN guidelines for responsible investment. So Ronald is an associate with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. He has supported the member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in promoting responsible investment in food, agriculture, and forestry. He holds a bachelor's degree in law from Gadjah Mada University and a master's in law from the University of Groningen. So welcome.
Thank you, Miko, and it's my pleasure to be here today. And I had a wonderful opportunity to join the previous sessions, and I believe it provided us with a very thorough perspective from the private sector. I think for this session, we will see things a bit differently because we have a very excellent speaker from the public sector that's already here with us. And I would like to start by introducing Dr. Chon Sarut from Cambodia, who is also the chair for the Conservation, Agriculture and Sustainable Intensification Consortium. Dr. Chon Sarut is the Undersecretary of State for the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. He gained a master's degree in agriculture engineering and management, and also a PhD in business management. In addition to that, he has developed many publications related to agriculture conservation, mechanization, human resources development in public sector, women empowerment, and so on. Moreover, he has over 30 years of experiences in various fields of agriculture development, ranging from engineering, biomass, climate resilience, capacity development, and gender mainstreaming. And without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Sarut to start the presentation. And I would invite also the audience to remember to post your questions in the chat box so we can have further discussion after the presentation. Thank you very much. And I will give the floor to Dr. Sarut.
So let's start my presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Chon.
Okay. Thank you, the organizer, and also thank you, Ronald and Michael, for facilitation. And I would like to thank for inviting me to make a presentation in this important event. I think it's good that we are talking about agricultural land use for the especially among the Southeast Asian country. So next slide, please. It is the content of my presentation, and I would like to share some of the experiences, especially what we have done related to the conservation agriculture and sustainable intensification and agroecology that very much respond to the climate change. So I would like that in this the initiatives, it would be one of the example that for considering that how we could work together in the future to make sure that agriculture can be secure for the future as well. Next slide, please. Like most of the Southeast Asian country, agriculture is a key driver to economic development in our country. And to achieve a sustainable agriculture goal at 5% per annum, aim to achieve of the government that objective for the food security, poverty reduction, and increase the climate resilience as well. So next slide, please. As you see that most of the agricultural community in our country that mainly we rely on the paddy as the rice, about 3.3 million hectare, and for non-rice around 1.46 million hectare. So we have around total around 5 million hectare for agricultural land in our country. Next slide, please. For the agricultural land degradation in Cambodia, from the previous presenter already mentioned that now we are facing a lot of problems, especially for the farmer, as well for the smallholder farmer, they are facing a lot of the challenges because of the climate change. And also more than that, the land degradation and water scarcity are also the real challenge for global food security, and is also the particular relevant to Cambodia as well. The main issue concerning the land degradation in Cambodia are the conversion of forest to non-forest, climate change effect, pest and disease, unsustainable land management practice, soil erodibility, and infrastructure development. The UNCCD National Action Program, which has recently been approved by the Cabinet of the Ministry of the Royal Government Cambodia, has set the foundation for the political commitment from the government toward achieving land degradation neutrality by 2030. The NAP has set the goal toward achieving poverty alleviation and maintain sustainable agricultural development through effective use and manage of local land and forest resources to improve mitigation and adaptation capacity to climate change. Next slide, please. And you can see from the map of the Cambodia that so it is extremely that a lot of challenges. There's a need that for the agricultural sector to transform itself from the increased production through the land expansion with unsustainable use of land resources toward sustainable intensification. You can see the vulnerability of soil erosion very high, about 0.49 million hectares, and the smallholder farmers are particularly vulnerable to climate change, given they are high dependent on rainfall and minimal crop diversification. And 6.3 million Cambodians living on degrading agricultural land in 2010, practicing poor land management. Next slide, please. And by the study, observed that the annual cost of land degradation is estimated at around 677 million, or 3% of the country GDP. Conventional tillage practice may increase soil loss by 13 times more than conservation agricultural practice on 5% slope, and soil erosion resulted in loss of carbon of the stock of carbon. You see about the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Next slide, please. Before talking about the conservation agriculture in Cambodia, I would like to share in this the conference that the reason why we are considering about what is the future need for promoting agriculture in Cambodia. We just learned that from the previous, the deforestation is one of the main objectives. However, in the last 10 years, we also consider that the land, the abundant land is also a major issue, especially the smallholder farmer, because of the climate change. There are two main causes. The first one, that the drought and flood, that farmer could not be able to get any benefit of that, and another one, that the land degradation. From year to year, the land, agricultural land, decreasing no more fertile that need some the agricultural input like the fertilizer or herbicide. That's why the burden for the farmer, especially the smallholder farmer, to afford an additional the resources or budget to buy it. Otherwise, they could not be able to get any benefit of that. And like what said that the other one of the climate change, that if the farmer unlucky, they have the drought or flood, they could not get anything. That's why very serious that most of the farmer migrate to work for the other sector, or maybe most of them migrate to the city to find any benefit that they could be able to survive. That's why I just try to say that some before we just consider about the deforestation, but now another one of the main challenges is the abundant land. So how we can make sure and secure that they could continue to work and get benefit from their own agricultural land. This is also the why we try to introduce the initiative that we call the conservation agriculture and sustainable integration, because from the what we did almost 20 years, that we know that there are three principles on the conservation agriculture and sustainable integration. The first one, that the zero tillage or minimize tillage. So we try to minimize use of the plowing or harrowing. That's why we record that the farmers also, they need to spend some money, some budget for doing this operation. The other one, we try to, instead of using the chemical fertilizer, that we try to encourage to introduce the cover crop, or we just that we can say that it is a green manure. So after we use the different kind, right now we have around 150 the seed variety, and we select around 40 that is accepted that in Cambodian condition that can be used for the farmer and also other stakeholder. And we also try also to introduce the crop rotation. So it is the way that we try to minimize the expense of the farmer, but we try to increase the profit of the farmer. At the same time, we want also to increase we want to have the land more fertilized from year to year as well. Next slide, please. So you can see from the conservation agriculture research for development and intervention area. We have several places, we have several demonstrations to encourage the farmer and also the different stakeholders to just to observe, and also they just try to consider what is they are considering what is the need and what is the in terms of the climate change. So what they are going to do instead of the many challenges. This is what we have done most of these nearly of the 20 years ago, from the research to the demonstration, and after demonstration we start to introduce the service. And right now we are increasing a number of the farmer who also want to apply this approach. And also we also have different stakeholders also want to participate and also to support each other as well. And you can see in the next slide, please. You see the development, the adaptable management practice. So we just like what I said, that in 2004 we just try to introduce it in the rubber plantation farm, that we introduced the cover crop under the in the rubber tree, and we also have different kind of the machinery, small scale, medium scale, and large scale in that the different places. And up to the 2008, you can see that we also tried to introduce some the demonstration. And in 2010, we also introduced in the vegetable system with the conservation and the agriculture. And from that, we start to provide a service to the farmer who need to apply partly or fully conservation agriculture. And right now we are on the stage that we engage more with the private sector. That's why I think that very important the role of the private sector to engage on this initiative as well. Next slide, please. Because of the need, we could say that we have different organizations, from the non-government organization, from the research institution, from the private sector. They are working on the conservation agriculture and sustainable implementation. However, they did not have a chance to work together. They work differently. Research institution, they just doing on research. The private sector just on to introduce something that they want to introduce their own product as well, and also some the non-government organization also how they could secure with the social need, and also make sure that the farmer who are living in the rural area could be able to adapt with that technology also. And because of that, from the government side, we just observe that it is the need to bring all of them to work together. So it is, we start to establish the the Cambodia Conservation Agriculture and Sustainable Implementation Consortium. It's just a short name, the CASIC. CASIC is just only the platform that to facilitate and coordinate with different stakeholders, because they need to, like, for example, the demands from the demand side, they also look for any service they could provide the support. However, from the supply side, they did not have a chance to meet with the demand side. So that's why it is a chance that from the government side to initiate and also to organize this platform, that they could be able to meet and to work together, and also to agree what they could do and develop together as well. And it is the need that we could say that we established in mid of 2020, and up to now we could say that the production of the conservation agriculture and sustainable implementation double. Even we just start in 2004, but this only a small of the number of the farmer or other stakeholder involved on this, the approach, very, very little. Next slide, please. It is the organizational structure and arrangement. So we have the decision making level at the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, and we have a steering committee that consists of the line ministry. We have the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Water Resources, Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Women Affairs, who serve at the steering committee. And after that, we have the executive level. We also have the different line, some the relevant line department under the Ministry of Agriculture work on in this level. And we also have the subcommittee that we have 4 subcommittee who work and support under the management of the executive board. However, I would like to highlight that the role of the CASIC executive board is not the implementing agency. The role of executive board just only coordinating and supporting the subcommittee. So for all the resources, including the financial resources, so all the subcommittee managed by themselves. So the CASIC executive board just only what they need to work together and organize any event together. So we could also be able to organize this event. And in order to make sure that we are doing on the right way, we also have the technical referent, or we call the support unit from the international organization. List down here, like SEARCA, we contact European Conservation Agriculture Federation, US Conservation Agriculture Association, KIMIT, FAO, UN, CSAM, and China Institute for Conservation Village as well. Next slide, please. And you can see that, like I already mentioned, that now from the 2004, we did only the research, and then up to the 2010, and we start introducing the service for the farmer, but it's not large enough because at that time we did not have the involvement of the private sector. Only in the 2019, we have more the engagement with different stakeholders, and also at that time, the CASIC, the Conservation Agriculture and Sustainable Implementation Consortium start. We have more the involvement with different stakeholders, like the private stakeholder, the different private sector also engage. Also, we also have a chance that the more demand from the farmer and different stakeholder, they need to apply partly or fully conservation agriculture and sustainable implementation. Next slide, please. And you can see, like we already mentioned, that up to the 2017, we also have around 280 hectares of land apply the conservation agriculture. But in 2018, at the beginning, at the late 2018 and beginning of 2019, you see the number of the farmer or different stakeholder apply the conservation agriculture and sustainable integration decrease double. And now you can see from 2019, 2020, and 2000, from 500 nearly around 1,400 hectares. That it is a huge amount. That because of this initiative, that we try to find a way how we could provide the first one, respond to the climate change. The other one, the appropriate technology that the farmer, especially the smallholder farmer, could be able to get the benefit, could be able to stay more longer at the field, could be able to keep their land for agriculture in the future as well. Next slide, please. Right now, we also introduce a new approach that we can say that early adapter lead extension model. We call the Madagascar is the the friend of the farmer. You see the early adapter lead the extension service model. The Medcasco focuses on opening the market for private sector investment on sustainable intensification via government agency and the private sector to smallholder farmer in Cambodia. Next slide, please. So it is the combination of different angles to work together under the CASIC platform. We also have the public sector. We also have the private sector. We also have other supporter like the community or the local authority that we can say that early adapter. Our approach that starting from the research, after that a field demonstration, and then we also organize the event that the chance that between the demand side and the supply side. So we call the early adapter. That means in that particular commune, if they need to apply the conservation agriculture and sustainable intensification, how many hectares that they need the service to do that activity on their community. For example, they need around 300 or 400 hectares for this year. So from the supply side, especially the private sector as the service provider, they also can make a plan or calculation. Do they get any profit? Do they could do any operation and make sure that they can get more opportunity from this event? So it is just only the agreement between the demand and supply, but under the umbrella of the CASIC that represent of the from the public the institution. And we also have the government extension also involved as well to make sure that to provide the any training to the farmer and different stakeholders, how they could be able to fully apply or partly apply this conservation agriculture and sustainable intensification as well. Next slide, please. So it is the process that the Medcasco step for your information. We start from the identification of potential agricultural cooperative farmer as service provider. And then the demand creation with agricultural cooperatives, service provider, and smallholder farmer. They have a chance to come, to meet, and to talk to each other. And we also have the showcase, field showcase by early adapter farmer of sustainable integration operation sequences. And then we start to have the commercial demonstration. That means a large-scale demonstration led by the private sector to showcase sustainable intensification practice and technology. And we also have the annual meeting to review the progress of the model. And finally, we come to the large stage that we call the promotional meeting with the private sector. Next slide, please. So I would like to conclude my presentation, and I'm very pleased to have any question or any contribution that to sharing with this initiative, because we are also how to say that learning by doing, but we also appreciate any suggestion or any recommendation, and also any question that I could be able to provide answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarut, for a very comprehensive presentation. And I also have been advised that today is a public holiday in Cambodia. So we really commend your efforts that you have put to make yourself available for this presentation. And I just would like to invite all the questions that the participants might have before I have my own question. Do we have, please use the chat box to put your questions, and please feel free to send it directly to me or also to the audience.
In as much as we don't have questions for now, Ronald, maybe we would probably start with the questions that we have ourselves. So
Oh, sure. So, Dr. Sarut, I've noted from your presentation that you have mentioned the role of the government to open up opportunity for the private sectors to enter the market. And by definition, when you're mentioning opening the market, what kind of measures that the government put in place? I know that you have put Metsakor as an example. I just wanted to know the bigger policy framework. For example, do you provide any incentive like subsidies or tax cuts for private investment? Or do you open your foreign direct investment sector to 100% foreign ownership? Or what other measures that you think are important for Cambodia as of during the implementation as of now?
Okay. Thank you. Rona, I think it is also a very good question, and also like what I already informed in my presentation, that at the beginning of this conservation agriculture, like we start from the 2004, and you can see that not much the farmer or any stakeholder interested in this activity, even the private sector. So that's why the government role, that how we could engage the private sector in this initiative. So as you know, that very hard to convince the private sector, because the private sector also, you know, the most important that they also to do the business and also to get the benefit as well. So if they look on this this case, if they could get the any opportunity or any benefit for the only the company or any the institution, they will do it. They will do it. I think that because they did not hesitate to do that. However, they don't want to invest their own at risk without not having any support or any evidence. That is why we try that it is the, we could say, the early stage, that we try to convince the government as well. We can say it is the not the top-down approach. We can say it is the bottom-up approach. We see the issue at the ground, and also the government initiate to bring all the different supporter, including the private sector, to involve. Like I said, that the first we try to convince the private sector. Now we have around 100 hectares in that area to apply the conservation agriculture and sustainable implementation. And then from the private sector side can also calculate, okay, how many the machinery and equipment they could buy, and for doing the operation in that area. You know, that's why if they from that how do you say that this even they but to make sure that the involvement of the government, the institution, and also the as well the local authority, very important. That's why we bring the representative from the Ministry of Interior involved in the CASIC steering committee, because if from the community or from the farmer they just request, okay, let's come to my community, we have 1,000 hectares, but when the private sector come, nothing happened. So who will take care of this loss. So it is very important that step by step that we try to convince the private sector. And right now we have more and more engaged from the private sector. Like you can see from the figure, from 2019 and 2000, we have around 500 hectares, but right now we have up to 1,400 hectares. You know, it is a lot of the change from the beginning. You know, from the 2004, we just only small, less than 50 the hectare applied partly or fully conservation agriculture. So from that message, right now we try to expand our activity to 8 provinces. Now we have only two provinces apply the conservation agriculture, but we look for increasing to the other 8 provinces. And then we also at the same time we also prepare. You can see we also have how you can see this. You can see it. We also have our own roadmap for the CASIC for 5 years. How we could bring all the relevant stakeholders, and also how we could have the policy dialogue that to convince the high-ranking or decision maker or the government to provide more support, and then we can also apply this initiative in the countrywide. So I could say that we could not say what refer to your question, but it is just what like what I said, that we learning by doing, but we observe that the number of the different stakeholders are increasing from year to year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarut, for that answer and explanation. We do have one question from participant. It's from Malaysian Department of Agriculture, if I'm not mistaken, from Ms. Zakia. So her question would be, in the era of modernization and urbanization, what is the greatest challenges in promoting agricultural conservation?
Okay, thank you for the question. Of course, you know, it is very difficult to change, but it is very important that you know, it depends on the government policy. You know, for the some country like the Indonesia and Singapore, they're also more developed, and also we could say the industrialized country. However, they still need the agriculture sector, also one of the key supporter as well. So the conservation agriculture is not only what apply for the large field, but also they could also apply for the small field, especially for the vegetable as well. And it is the one that we could say that the respond that because now we are talking about the organic the product, that this the conservation agriculture, we try to encourage farmers not to apply more chemical fertilizer, but instead that we try to introduce the green manure. So instead of the cover crop, and after that they can use the cover crop that become to the green manure and also apply. It is also very important that especially the smallholder farmer, they also can save the money instead of buying the chemical fertilizer. That the first one is also the negative impact as well. It's not for the farmer and also for the buyer as well. So the farmer can secure and also can save. And another, the more than that, the soil erosion. With the cover crop, they also can minimize of the soil erosion, and also they also can keep the water more longer during the drought period as well. So I could say that at least for the industrial country, if they can apply the conservation agriculture, at least they can keep the migration. They can keep the migration of the farmer from their agricultural field to the other sector. So it is, but I'm not quite the 100% sure. But the most important, if the farmer they could survive, they could get some benefit from that, they will stay more longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarut. And with that, I would like to wrap up this session, and would like again to thank you very much for Dr. Sarut's presence with us today, and for all the participants' questions and also contributions to the session. And I will turn it over to Miko.
Thanks very much, Ronald, and also thank you very much, Dr. Sarut. Now I will invite again Ronald and Krisa Marie Borja to present the ASEAN Guidelines for Responsible Investment in Food, Agriculture, and Forestry, Insights from Development and Implementation. So because I have already introduced Ronald, I will now introduce Krisa Marie Borja, who is the Regional Programs Officer at Grow Asia. She supports the ASEAN Guidelines for promoting responsible investment in food, agriculture, and forestry, Grow Asia's gender mainstreaming initiatives, and Grow Asia's learning and communications efforts. She's called Borj, and she has worked in the agriculture and forestry sector in Southeast Asia on sustainability standards. Borj received her bachelor's degree in human ecology and a postgraduate diploma in urban and regional planning from the School of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of the Philippines. So over to you now, Borj and Ronald.
Thank you very much, Miko. Probably we just start directly to the slides. I would like to start by acknowledging that we have been grateful to work directly with ASEAN member states and also with ASEAN Secretariat for the ASEAN Guidelines on promoting responsible investment in food, agriculture, and forestry. And we also have been enormously feel supported as well by our partners that are directly supporting us doing these efforts, which are the Swiss Development Corporation, the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Offices of the UK, and also Japan under the Japan-ASEAN Cooperation Framework. And also we also work together with FAO and, as I've mentioned earlier, ASEC, ASEAN Secretariat, in making the guidelines adopted and also being implemented. And I would like to start with the next slide, please. So as you might be aware of, and I think several of us has been heavily involved in development of the guidelines, but probably for us who has not really aware of the guideline itself, ASEAN RAI, or the Guidelines for Promoting Responsible Agriculture Investment in Food, Agriculture, and Forestry, is basically a tool. It's a soft law, help to develop support for the policymakers to make sustainable ag investment happen. Why? How does it operate? As it is a soft law, it is a guidelines. It provides some sort of like a compass, like a roadmap, like a GPS, not exactly like a GPS, but because it consists of policy principles, it helps the policymakers to know what should be the priorities in the sustainable ag investment. And this is not obviously the end of the goal, because we emphasize that ASEAN RAI should be the foundation for the region, for ASEAN member states in developing the policy, legal, and institutional framework for sustainable investment. And as we will show later on, this has gained a lot of support because obviously this is the guidelines that being adopted by the ASEAN member states themselves, and it has gained high level support by the governments, and it was adopted actually by the ASEAN ministers for agriculture and forestry. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, the guidelines were meant to seek the sustainable investment by balancing rights and interest. What do we mean by balancing rights and interest? We want to strike a balance between the government's right to regulate and also the need for the government to attract foreign direct investment, as not all foreign direct investment is a sustainable investment, factually. How we can do this? We established a guidance framework through the guidelines. We have a very high-level policy principles that member states or other countries beyond the region could consider to integrate it to their own national policies. And what's interesting about the ASEAN RAI, as it also were developed based on international standards like the Committee on World Food Security Sustainable Ag Investment Guidelines, it is also applicable for a wide range of stakeholders. It can be used by the private sectors. It can be used as well by the civil societies. So what we intended to have with this wide range of stakeholders, we can develop an enabling environment which not only includes what the government is doing, but also what the private sector and the civil society is doing as well. Next slide, please. So as the guidelines were clearly developed based on international standards, it was made to align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And especially, as you can see in the slide, particular guidelines, which I think will be relevant for us on SDG goal number 13 for climate actions, which my colleague Borch will explain a bit later on, which part of the guideline will be relevant for climate change. And this guideline is also meant to be applicable along the value chain, from the production side, from distribution, as well as to the consumer side of the equation. And this has been a long journey since 2018, and we have obviously implemented the guidelines in a very structured way with full support by the ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. So this is what happened in the previous years. We have developed this based on the initiative by and we have been working directly with all the partners to engage the ASEAN Secretariat and also the ASEAN member states directly to draft this guidelines and also the action plan. And during the drafting of the guidelines, there will have comprehensive public consultation were in place with a lot of stakeholders from private, public, and also civil societies. And in 2018, the guideline was adopted, and post 2018, we have developed this action plan, which will, we can go to the next slide. This is the action plan that we have built, that ASEAN member states have agreed upon, have set their mind into having this implementation of the guideline in a 10-year horizon. And by having this 10-year horizon, the ASEAN member states also agreed to set priority on 4 pillars, which would be the national legal and policy services. This is something that we, the project partners, ISD, FAO, has been closely working with ASEAN member states in supporting a development of a legal policy and institutional framework. And on the second pillar would be the learning and accreditation program, which the Grow Asia is spearheading the efforts, which they work directly with the counterparts, which are mainly coming up from the private sector. And on the third outcome, which would be the regional and national capacity building, this is something that the Grow Asia has taken the lead as well, where there is this, I think Borch will explain it in a bit more detail about it, how this capacity building is being done and what has been done for the past 2 years. And this one is also, I think, come into the Grow Asia's domain as well, on investor engagement and impact management, how we can try to encourage investors to adopt ASEAN RISE through case studies and tools that we develop to help initiate the sustainable ag investment in the region. Next slide, please. And I think this is some Borch, if I may invite you to start on this slide, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Ronald. And if we can go back to the previous slide so I could add on the pillars that Ronald has mentioned with our work in Croatia. Thank you. And by the way, good afternoon to everyone. So I just want to highlight as well some of the pillars that Croatia has been working on, particularly on pillar 2, that aims to build a group of experts to practically apply the guidelines and can respond to stakeholder queries for future investments. Now for this, we will be launching a blended learning program for 400 participants next year. So this will be upcoming. And for pillar 4 in particular, to answer as well a great question from Dr. Margaret earlier, this pillar encourages the adoption of the ASEAN RAI through case studies of agribusiness investors as well as financial investors. And in the coming weeks, we will be publishing the first batch out of the 14 case studies of agribusiness investments in the region. And we also started the ASEAN RAI private sector community of practice to continue to strengthen our engagement and strengthen the adoption with investors in the region. Right, next slide, please. And as was showed earlier, these are the 10 thematic areas or guidelines that are addressed to the ASEAN member states and are adapted to the specific challenges facing the ASEAN. One in particular, as Ronald has already mentioned, is on climate change, which is guideline number 7. Next slide, please. I'd like to highlight guideline 7 in particular. Here, we have what are included in the guideline and the role of the AMS or the governments that should consider. The guideline highlights scaling up adaptation measures, and having affordable strategies for climate resilience. This also encourages the development of financial risk protection products for smallholders and SMEs in particular. That also includes strategic PPPs or public-private partnerships. The guideline also highlights promotion of indigenous and traditional knowledge and practices in sustainable crop management, and acknowledging and responding to the heightened vulnerability of women, youth, children, and other marginalized groups, including those that are living in at-risk areas. What does this mean for the government, though? It means increasing public funds to support climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies, as well as developing legal and policy frameworks to harness private sector finance and innovative insurance products and services. Next slide, please. All right. And now I'd like to share what we learned from our private sector community in particular, that there is a strong interest in aligning with the climate change guideline, along with other climate initiatives. Investors are interested in programs and practices that they can embed into their business practices. Some specific topics that our partners mentioned include climate financing, carbon assessment, and carbon credits. Agribusinesses are adapting continuous improvements in their supply chains as well, as showed earlier by Kun Kam from Taiwan, by using carbon reduction and adapting climate smart strategies, to name a few examples. Some companies in the forestry sector, for example, are already conducting verified carbon credits into their supply chain. So a pretty forward thinking. And through the community of practice, we aim to continuously support our private sector partners in learning and sharing not just the best practices, but also the lessons that they have learned along with their investment process. And finally, to have an open discussion with the government and other stakeholders to recognize the initiatives of the private sector and to level the playing field by integrating ASEAN RAI into specific national policies. Over to you, Ronald.
Thank you, Borch. Can go to the next slide, please. So what we are working on right now with ASEAN member states are the implementation of the guidelines, and this include using the ASEAN RAI alignment assessment tool. As I previously explained, the guidelines were quite high level. It's like a policy principles. It's not 8 technical or prescriptive measures that we have put into the guidelines. That's why we have this tool to help us consider what kind of measures or policies or examples that the countries should consider in order to implement the guidelines. And we can go to the next slide, please. So this is the process looks like. We have developed the tool in a way that it operates like a checklist. It consists of Excel spreadsheet document basically and a Word document to help explain the spreadsheet. And it's a scoring mechanism is in place between 1 to 5 to assess the degree of alignment, the national policy framework with ASEAN RAI, with 1 being not aligned and 5 being aligned. So the process would consist of a self-assessment, which would be an interagency process where governments the ministries and agencies sit together to look into their own framework and to do assessment of how it will fit with the ASEAN RAI guidelines. Then there will be this review process of which it can be done internally or it can be done externally with the work together with the partners, including work with the other ASEAN member states and also partners like international organizations. And after that, we obviously will determine like the degree of alignment. And this will help in the end to know exactly what kind of gaps are in place and what should be done in the future to better implement the guidelines and obviously to have a sustainable ag investment in the country. And as of now, we are working with 4 ASEAN member states in doing this assessment process. And the process is actually starting now this month. We have worked together with ASEAN Secretariat to finalize the countries that we are working with. And hopefully within the next 6 months, hopefully, we can have the first exercise or the first 2 exercises from 2 ASEAN member states to be completed and to be finished. And hopefully we can share it with the audits and the stakeholders in the region. And I would say we can go to the next slide, please. So the next steps would be on how to engage, as these guidelines were meant basically for a wide range of stakeholders. And for the investor engagement, our board has explained it quite comprehensively. You can see we are developing not only a case studies, but also a scoring tool, which is different with the one that we developed for the government. This is something that is meant tailored for the private sectors to see the behaviors of the private sectors and how we can assess their measures towards the guideline itself. And we also have, as boards mentioned as well, is the pilot training program, which will start next year. And this is all in together are part of the 10-year action plans that we have working on. So please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact detail will be on the last slide. Thank you very much, everyone, boards, for all your contribution as well. And Pamiko, I would like to give this over to you.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Thank you also, boards, for the presentation and explaining how the guidelines is being developed and how it will be moved further, as well as how people and countries in this conference will be able to engage with the further development of the guidelines. Thank you very much for that. Okay, at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we will now have our final group photo for the conference. So can I invite everyone to please turn their cameras on so we can take a group photo, and we will do this by page. So please hang on up until the last frame so that we make sure that our camera captures everyone. So please guide us, technical team, on how we'll do this.
Hello, everyone. Wait for others to open their cameras.
So we're requesting everyone to open their cameras. Thank you. Oh, well, there are very many of us. Oh,
there are 4 pages, so
okay.
Please hold on. Okay, let's start. The count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Second page. 1, 2, 3. There are only 2 pages open, their cameras, so that's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, technical team, and also thank you very much, everyone, for opening your cameras for the final group photo for the conference. This time, I also would like to request our technical team to show the illustration produced by Tika from our session today. So these are just initial sketches because we still have a few remaining discussions for today. The final ones will be included in the report along with the illustrations from the previous days. So can we show the slides now? Okay, so this is the first plenary session that we have this morning. No, not this morning, but at the beginning of the afternoon. So we have those looking at the damaging incentives, the starting talk on indigenous people, small scale farmers and organic agriculture. Then we also have the next one. Can we see the next one, please? Or this is the only one? Oh, yeah. Okay. One more? Okay, so this is the only one that we were able to produce for now. And okay, there are two actually. So, okay, so at this point, I would like to ask you again to indulge me in a quick survey to assess our views regarding the three different topics we have discussed since Tuesday. So our technical team will be posting a link on the chat box. Please click on the link and answer the three questions that we have prepared for you. Well, actually 2 questions only. So I will give you 2 minutes to access the link and answer the questions. For those of you who are unable to see the link on the chat box, please just go to your browsers and type www.menti.com. Then if it asks for a code, use code 49201988. Okay, some music, please, technical team, so that we will be inspired to answer the questions. The last 2 questions for the survey that will be asked. So can I request the technical team now to show our Menti boards? So which among the key discussion topics in this conference do you find most useful in your work? So out of 77 participants, 37 has answered, and we're now actually quite, I mean, the distribution is quite similar across. 12 for multi-level governance, 14 for inclusive and participatory policymaking, and 11 for enabling private investments for climate smart land use. Can we go to the next question, please? What do you consider as your most significant learning from the conference? There's gender inclusivity, collaboration, climate risk assessment, climate finance, participation in best practices, the importance of gender inclusivity, enabling policy for smallholder agriculture, collaboration, private sector engagement and policy discussion, policymakers play important roles, private-public partnership, multi-level governance in the implementation of CSLU, and several others. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in the poll. I think what you have written there as your key learning will be a good jump-off point in this quick reflection exercise that our invited speakers will do. So I will introduce them in one go, and will invite them later to give their 4-minute contributions to the question, what are your personal 3 key takeaways from the conference related to strategies, policies, governance frameworks in promoting climate smart land use in the region? So our first speaker will be Mohammed Haris bin Abdul Rahman, currently the Deputy Director, Climate Change Program, Agrobiodiversity and Environment Research Center of the Malaysian Agricultural Research Development Institute. He has worked for about 12 years in the environmental engineering and climate change studies. He is part of the Technical Working Group for Agricultural Sector for the last 10 years, contributing to Malaysia's National Communications and Biennial Update Report submitted to the UNFCCC. Our second speaker is the incoming chair of the Global Alliance of Climate Smart Agriculture. Dr. Imelda Dadabaku is a senior consultant and expert on climate smart agriculture, land use policy, and climate finance with various international development agencies. She has also served as principal advisor of the Forest and Climate Change Project with GIZ, natural resource management expert, climate policy specialist with UNEP, and as conservation finance technical advisor with the Uganda Wildlife Authority, among others. Finally, our third speaker is Dr. Glenn B. Gregorio, a professor at the Institute of Crop Science, College of Agriculture and Food Science, UPLB, in the Philippines, and currently the Center Director of Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, or SEARCA. Recently appointed as chairman for the Technical Panel for Agriculture by the Commission on Higher Education, and steering committee member of the Department of Agriculture Biotechnology Program. Dr. Gregorio was also conferred the rank of academician by the National Academy of Science and Technology of the Philippines, and recently recognized as 2020 UPLB College of Agriculture and Food Science Distinguished Alumnus for rice genetics and breeding. So I would like to invite first Mr. Muhammad Haris bin Abdul Rahman to take the floor and share his reflections.
All right, thank you, Michael. Can you hear my voice?
Perfectly.
All right. So basically, we have learned a lot from our 3 days conference. Some of the key important messages or points that we can bring home are as follows. On the first day, when we learned the topic about the multi-level governance for climate smart land use, the experiences shared by all the speakers were very interesting. In this regards, there are 3 key important points. The first one is about the systemic process or the thinking process about climate smart land use and climate smart agriculture itself is changing, because currently we have more reflections on the systemic issues, right from government and policies until how the products are being marketed. So it is not centered on technological applications and development on field, but rather include other enabling factors. And this is how things are going on in Southeast Asia. The second one is about the polycentric features that we learned on the first day during the parallel sessions. Polycentric features and approaches that have been translated in several ASEAN platforms, including the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, ASEAN CRN, and ASEAN Negotiation Group of Agriculture, which is part of that, ANGA, which involved in the COP negotiations. The meaning of polycentric itself could be quite complex initially for me, but from my understanding can be simplified as local. I mean, it's from global to local in terms of decentralization on decisions making, which is devolved to the host country in this process. So in this regards, we can see examples from the platforms such as the ASEAN CRN itself, because it comprises of people or from multidisciplinary background from many countries, and these experts provides a very important information from each country perspectives towards achieving common ASEAN goals. Thirdly, I would like to bring important points from one of the presentations, in fact from Pak Dian from ASEAN Secretariat, on how to mainstream the regional policies by integration to national policies. It stated 2 important points there. The first one is to ensure ownership or togetherness through intensive dialogues on developing policies based on the member state needs and promote as regional agenda. And the second one is about bridging the needs through multi-level governance and thematic approach. I think togetherness has been very much discussed in our second day by many of the speakers, and 4 additional important points there. The first one is many of the national and state government policies have always engaged local communities in the process of policy development and implementation. This is one of the points by Pak Ricky yesterday. And the second one is, most importantly, this include local communities and marginalized group. It is interesting to note that one of the speakers mentioned that indigenous people occupy 80% of planet's biodiversity enriched in natural resources. Therefore, land is life for these indigenous people. Nevertheless, they contribute less to climate change but suffer the most. So the role of indigenous people should be recognized and they should be engaged. The first point is interesting point by video presentation by Mr. Randy yesterday about togetherness or camaraderie. It's a mutual trust and friendships among us in good times and bad times. So it is a call by our farmers in helping them through that by that positive attitudes. On this day, on the third day, we learned about the role of private sector investment and how they can play important roles to promote climate smart solutions in agriculture and forestry. I think from the government point of view, the right information from our stakeholders, what we learned on the first and second day, ensure better policies are put in place, and its implementation should be spearheaded by the private sector, and the government should play key roles in promoting it. So in a nutshell, currently, we really emphasize the elements of togetherness or ensuring ownership in any process involved at national and regional level, and this has been translated into polycentric approaches right at the ASEAN level. So therefore, I believe this could bring us to the right direction to move forward at the ASEAN level. So that's my overview of the lesson learned from this important conference. Thank you. Over back to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rahman. Togetherness, ensuring ownership, and polycentric approaches are the keywords that I'm getting from your presentation. And thanks for keeping to the time. This time around, I would like to invite Dr. Dada to give us her thoughts, her observations from the last 3 days.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Before I begin, I would like to congratulate Mr. Harris for such a very profound and insightful sharing on his reflection. I believe it's my first time to see you and hear you talk very eloquently. I'm very happy to see that. So everybody, I'm very happy to see you again on the third day of this conference. It's my honor to give reflections on this 3-day workshop. As incoming co-chair of the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, I'm happy to see the 3 pillars of CSA figuring prominently on the theme of this workshop. And this would be the 3 pillars of CSA would be promotion of mitigation potential in agriculture and land use sector, promoting adaptation measures in agriculture and land use sector, and of course, while at the same time ensuring that sustainable income is assured for our farmers and rural population. So as well, moreover, as the de facto convener of ASEAN CRN and ASEAN Negotiating Group for Agriculture, I feel the theme of the multi-level governance in the land use also reflects the experiences of these 2 groups. So I'm very thankful for this conference that gives us rethinking points, because I believe we've arrived at the juncture in history when CSA, which was coined in 2014 and 2015, has traveled so far from since then. And I believe one of my first reflections is that we are really in this rethinking juncture in our work. And we are rethinking the definition of terms such as CSA and how our governance system also works in the land use. Thank you for all the speakers who have provided us, for me, rethinking points. This afternoon, the Global Alliance on Climate Smart Agriculture, of which CRN and some of you are members, will be having our annual forum. I think it is already starting as I speak. And we will be sharing some of the reformulation and rethinking of strategies of CSA. So please allow me to share some of the rethinking ways that I feel resonates with also some of the themes of this workshop. The focus, we are now going back into CSA as a strategy that really focusing on innovation and technologies for food systems. We are also putting back the centrality of the role of farming in this approach, because in some parts, we have forgotten the centrality of the role of farming. We are also looking at the importance of digital connectiveness in rural areas, and we are trying to really see how finance will directly connect to the farmers. So this is one of the key area, finance to the farmers. Personally, I am dreaming and looking forward to the day that all the terms that we are now being bombarded with, such as food systems, agroecology, biodiversity, nature-based solutions will all be married and live in one house or one framework. So I'm dreaming of that, and that is one of my insights, is really connecting these dots. Transformation is one of the buzzwords, not just for this workshop, but also for COP26. So it's kind of reflective of that. Transformation and urgent, because we know that the climate crisis is immense. But how do we bring about this transformation? We are demanding transportation. We are demanding transformation, but how do we do this? May I suggest that we really need to take more risk that take out of the box thinking. And how? One example I can suggest is, for example, collaboration. I think this is very elementary and very basic, but most of us in our work remain within our silos. I'm sorry to say, for example, ASEAN, we are very much living in our silos. And so perhaps getting out of this box, breaking down the boundaries, would actually be an out-of-the-box approach. And so I'm also looking forward for these strategic policy frameworks that will really connect all the dots, all the initiatives that we have heard in the last 3 days. Oops, where's my next note? I would like to make just one note on finance and the issue of safeguards. It was eye-opening for me to be reminded from Paul Steele's presentation that some of the financing that we are aiming to get really do have unintended consequences, and sometimes are wrong incentives that gives environmental disadvantages. So we hope that we keep this in mind. Also, some of the terms that we might be hearing or might be new to us, let's also try to balance this with the realization that some of the terms being used are also being used for greenwashing. So Paul has given this warning on afforestation offsets. So I hope that some of this warning on unintended consequences of financing and incentives, we will also get into as a good guidance for us. And lastly, I would like to end my presentation with and my reflection with two challenging questions. Both climate change and multi-governance or polycentric approach really cuts across divisions, boundaries, hierarchies, bureaucracies, and sectors. And so two major aspects of land use, I believe, we are not being very much in touch with these two elements that I think we need to incorporate. This is a challenge that I pose to all of us who work with ASEAN in whatever form, as ASEAN working group members or focal points, or with the ASEAN Secretariat, or with development partners with ASEC. At COP26, the role of land, soil, water that cuts across borders and sectors have been quite emphasized. And yet, we have not had really active participation, nor the existence of an ASEAN working group on land or an ASEAN working group on soil. I believe that Dr. Margaret has some early initiatives on soil guidelines, but we need to resurrect these, because some of the battle lines for land use management will be within the purview of such a working group if it exists, as well as an ASEAN working group on water, not marine, but on water. So this is I know that there's one water management group somehow under the sociocultural pillar, but we have not had a chance to really interact with that. So these two concrete suggestions I would leave to the group. Let's resurrect water and land, because it's very important for climate smart land use. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doc Dada. Thank you very much also for the very insightful and provocative questions. One of the participants here is actually saying he agrees with you that collaboration and silos are very true. Things that I learned, that I heard from your presentation, which for me is quite very philosophical, are the words journeying, rethinking, risk-taking, and connecting the dots. I think those themes are quite provocative in their nature, primarily because it actually questions our current assumptions of what we actually see and hear and feel and think within this space. Finally, I will now call in Dr. Gregorio for the final contribution. Please, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miko, and good afternoon, good evening, good day to all participants and speakers. The day or the conference really worth to be documented because there's a lot of information, a lot of learning that we should not miss or we should review. And I hope we could create some book or some monograph on this one because this is very important for all of us. At SEARCA, we are now in our, we have our theme, we call it Attain, which is very much related on what we have in this conference. Attain is accelerating transformation through agricultural innovation. So transformation is there again. We want to transform, actually I want to call it transformer. We have to transform our farmers to be from producers to be technology-based transformers to make this happen really. To outsmart our climate change. So at SEARCA, our priority areas are really, if you see it, the priority areas are really in line with our conference here because one is agribusiness models for increased productivity and income, sustainable farming system and natural resource management, food and nutrition security, transformational leadership for agricultural and rural development, gender and youth engagement, enhance agriculture and rural development towards climate resilience, and One Health, eco-health applications to agriculture and rural development. So those are really, if you look at those priority areas, it's really very near what we are talking about a while ago. And for the three topics on climate level governance and climate multi-level governance for climate smart land use, to ensure effective governance of climate smart land use technologies and approaches across scales, intervention should be supported with enough resources. I think those are always emphasized here, that climate, that knowledge and skills are made available and accessible, particularly to the most vulnerable communities, to transform them into resilient communities. These interventions should be summed up by a viable climate action agenda. Then we should institutionalize it across scale. These interventions include opportunities for sustainable and regenerative livelihood, empowering institutions, capacity building and technical training, and of course, partnership building. Policymakers will use this to develop innovative and transformative farming system, and this will contribute to the adaptation and mitigation strategies for climate change and improve agricultural productivity. So these are the things that I could get from the first topic. And the second topic on inclusive participatory policy making for promotion and adoption of climate smart land use. There are several discussions that we heard on climate change related events affecting agriculture that also contribute to food insecurity and unsustainable livelihood systems. It must be understood that they have occurred more rapidly in this time with increased intensity resulting in new risks emerging across multiple scale and bringing more unpredictable outcomes. Since concerns are multifaceted and would require evaluation and prioritization of sustainable strategies for climate smart land use, we should undertake inclusive and participatory approaches, which was really mentioned in this topic. a right mix of technical and traditional knowledge system that is socially acceptable. Again, I'll say socially acceptable and adhere to the regional and global framework will really help in managing the emerging risks and trends that we are looking. And the third part on the enabling environment for private investment to climate smart land use, it is evident from the presentation and discussion that the national efforts and policy frameworks on climate smart land use practices in various ASEAN member states are implementing cross-sectoral approaches to addressing risk. This action requires large amount of funding. Again, I'm emphasizing large amount of funding, which could be sourced not only from the public fund, but from the private sectors as well. There's a need to increase private sector participation in policy discussions so that they will give more contributions also. Policymakers should develop mechanisms and safeguards that will not only ensure the sector's active involvement, but also bridge investment into climate smart land use. Example of this is the recognition of the role of markets, particularly in providing support to enhancing goods and services for undertaking climate smart land use. The benefits, on the other hand, must be captured by the small holders, farmers, and especially the vulnerable communities. Again, I would say that we should outsmart climate change by planning our land use, and let's collaborate and break silos to make this happen. Thank you very much and good evening. Back to you, Miko.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gregorio. Transformation, empowerment, strategic financing, and outsmarting climate change. Very big words there. Now, very quickly, I would just like to ask one question to each of you, which I would hope you would answer in 30 seconds time. Okay, looking back at all the things that you've shared collectively, individually and collectively in this forum now, I would just like to ask you if there's one singular change that you would like to see in this space and in the immediate term, what would that be?
Okay, I will start. Change of mindset. I think that's a very powerful, that will really domino effect on people. Change of mindset.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gregorio. Haris?
Right, just a simple one. I would like to see a more inclusive participation between the agriculture sector and forestry sector, because CSLU is still involved, because as mentioned yesterday, between CSA and Red Plus. So I would like to see that in the near future.
Thank you very much, Haris. Dr. Dada?
I just wanted to see a lot of bravery. A lot of bravery to break silos, a lot of bravery to go into untrod out of the box solutions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dada. Once again, Dr. Dada, Haris, and also Dr. Gregorio, thank you very much. And let's give them, ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause. Very short intervention, but very meaty, with meaning, and very insightful as well. Now, before we move to our closing plenary, we would like everyone to answer a conference evaluation survey first. The technical team will put the link in the chat box. We are doing this now because I know after this conference, we will go away and we will not answer these evaluation surveys. So the technical team will put the link on the chat box. Please accomplish the survey now. It will take less than 5 minutes to complete it. So if you please do it now, we will have around 5 minutes to do that. The technical team will play some music, and this will also give us enough time for the last 3 speakers for a closing session to prepare. So please click on the link and then answer the evaluation question. And then after that, after 3 or 4 or 5 minutes time, we will proceed with the closing plenary session of this 3-day conference. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for answering and accessing our survey. This time, ladies and gentlemen, we are now ushering ourselves to the final few minutes of the conference. And I would like to invite 2 distinguished representatives from the ASEAN policymaking sphere to reflect on the things we have just discussed. but also engage in some kind of a future thinking when providing an outlook about how the ASEAN, specifically the ASEAN CRN, will continue to promote climate smart land use in the region and globally. Our first speaker will be Dr. Margaret Yuvatana, the Director of the International Agricultural Affairs Group, Planning and Technical Division of the Department of Agriculture, Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperatives of Thailand. She has more than 25 years of experience with international collaborations, including ASEAN of the Department of Agriculture. She is also representing the chair of the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, or ASEAN CRN, and actively engaged with the ASEAN Negotiating Group on Agriculture. Dr. Yuvatana, please welcome.
Yes, okay. So I'll take my picture first. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants and organizers, on behalf of the ASEAN CRN, of which Thailand is the chair, I am grateful to be sharing this reflection at the end of this 3-day workshop on policy and governance issues within climate smart land use in our beloved ASEAN region. I hope that this sharing will identify ways ASEAN CRN can support the land use sector, to which our climate ambitions, and more importantly, support our farmers and rural population in the midst of climate change impacts. One of the earliest activities of ASEAN CRN back in 2014 coincides with the theme of this ASEAN conference, which was to promote the 3 pillars of climate smart agriculture. First is on promote adaptation. Second, explore agriculture's mitigation potential. And third, ensuring that sustainable farmers' income is achieved. Over the years, this was done through regular annual meetings, planning workshops, knowledge sharing, policy development, and partnership building in order to strategize our actions, secure technical and financial support, as among others. And these activities could not be realized without the commitment from the ASEAN CRN focal points of the 10 ASEAN member states. We strategize our plans to leverage with policy trends at national, regional, and global level. In the last couple of years, ASEAN CRN has also come to understand that to be effective, a landscape plans needs to be adopted and encompasses agriculture into forestry, fisheries, livestock, and other sectors or borders. Hence, the term climate smart land use. It is fortunate that ASEAN CRN is housed under the ASEAN Technical Working Group on Agricultural Research and Development that gave us the privilege to coordinate with all the sectors on crops, fisheries, livestock, and forestry. It is also an opportunity that ASEAN CRN is represented at the number of ASEAN subsidiary bodies and other relevant international platforms. The theme of multi-level governance for this workshop also resonates with the rich experience of ASEAN CRN as we continue to engage with implementation and policy development at various governing levels. ASEAN CRN, having a polycentric nature, as already mentioned by Haris and Dada, found herself able to align and adapt with circumstances or consequences, either good or bad. In the last 3 days, we have heard from diverse stakeholders working with ASEAN about initiatives that equip the land use sector with tools to cope with impacts of climate change. Indeed, at first glance, there seems to be many things that many actors engage with planning, developing, and implementing all at once. And so coordination and developing a cohesive framework to direct our endeavors into one common direction has always been a big challenge. Although I see this as a challenge, realizing it, this could be a great opportunity as well, because once we have woven a cohesive thread and connected the dots, every stakeholder definitely contributes to the framework of the overall ASEAN support. We are fortunate because with the support of the ASEAN Secretariat, cohesive framework exists from which our efforts can contribute towards the attainment of our goals. The ASEAN Secretariat continuously provided guidance and linked the ASEAN CRN to the relevant initiatives under the ASEAN Cooperation Framework. Examples are the ASEAN Recovery Framework and the 2025 Food, Agriculture, and Forestry Cooperation Vision Framework. And more recent initiatives, which is in the making, such as the ASEAN Sustainable Agriculture Guidelines, the third volume of the ASEAN Guidelines for the Promotion of Climate Smart Agriculture, in addition to several guidelines and knowledge products that were endorsed by the Ministers of Agriculture of the 10 ASEAN member states during the annual AMAP meetings. We also have heard from the other ASEAN pillars, such as the Rural Development and Poverty Eradication Framework, and from the environment pillars. And this is where I believe platforms like the ASEAN CRN and its many partners, especially those present here, can help ASEAN with. ASEAN CRN cooperates in the belief that support in the form of knowledge, policy, and finances are out there, but we all need to tap and leverage our resources together in a coordinated manner. For many years, the task of connecting the various initiatives has been considered of secondary importance. However, as with the climate crisis, we need to prioritize collaboration. I am happy to say, as they call me the grandmother of ASEAN CRN, we welcome all participants here to join us in supporting the transformation of the ASEAN agriculture towards low emissions and climate resilient food systems. And also at this conference brought us together so many potential partners in this endeavor, from the public institutions, international organizations, civil society organizations, private sectors, and many more. I would like to let you know that we would like to join you in your concerted efforts for sustainable management of our landscapes and resources. Please remember us and let ASEAN CRN be engaged with your activities in tackling the food security dimension of your climate change initiatives. Our work directly contributes to some of the strategic thrusts of the various ASEAN framework identified, and we hope to contribute together with partners who are present in this conference in the proposed ASEAN Sustainable Agriculture Guidelines. Our work plan is likewise open to revisions and open to include collaborations with your organizations. As we all know, land use management and climate change cut across sectors. This means it also cut across several working groups and ASEAN pillars. Hence, we need to strive towards dynamic ways of cutting through the boundaries in order to work together. ASEAN CRN has had experiences doing this, but not all of them have been pleasant. Fortunately, we persisted, and so moving forward and armed with our lessons learned in governance engagement, we will continue in this steady manner of reaching out to other sectors. I therefore encourage everyone to do so with bravery, as Dada already mentioned. It takes a lot of passion, devotion, noble intentions, and the love in what we are doing. I would also like to reflect on the issue of inclusivity, which must never be neglected. Empowering the most vulnerable to self-govern is an overriding theme as we combat climate change in the land use sector. ASEAN CRN has also supported the development of gender guidelines in the food, agriculture, and forestry sector, and we hope that we will see more of cases where it has been useful. The issue of finance and sustainability has been identified as a major challenge that prevents scaling up of identified approaches and practices to combat climate change. I would like to mention that several member states of ASEAN have collaborated to put together a multi-country proposal targeting the Green Climate Fund or GCF readiness allocation in order to address aspects of this financial gap by preparing the agriculture sector with plans that will target much needed investment. We hope we will contribute towards bridging this gap. I also hope we will be able to work with a lot of stakeholders here as we hopefully implement this project next year. Finally, I would like to remind everyone that should you wish to help in shaping policies at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, or other multilateral environmental agreement framework, please do not hesitate to use the ASEAN Negotiating Group for Agriculture, or ANGA, which tries to bring the demands and needs of the region at the UN level. Please use this as your voice for an ASEAN unified voice to show a stronger ASEAN when we go to negotiations. However, before we submit a joint position, an exhaustive process of gathering views and arriving at commonalities is undertaken. This therefore depends on each ASEAN member states, government system, how each process could be facilitated to have an on-time submission. So if you want to raise your national concerns at the UNFCCC negotiation process, please contact your respective ANGA focal points so we can carry it forward at this policy level. Before I end, allow me to congratulate the entire organizing team for making this event a great success, although with some technical glitches on the first day. But this only tests your ability to manage things at pressured situation. This proves that you are resilient and could adapt with any adverse conditions. On behalf of the Department of Agriculture, I would like to thank the GIZ CSLU project for giving the honor to the Department of Agriculture Thailand for hosting this important virtual conference, and for the overall support given to the facilitation and coordination of both ASEAN CRN and ANGA in the last couple of years, together with other partners. Thank you, ASEAN Secretariat, for recognizing our work and advancing us to make an entrance to the UNFCCC negotiation process. Thank you all speakers and participants for the rich knowledge you have shared that are valuable in policymaking and governance of our climate actions. At ASEAN CRN, we are looking forward for a healthy, collaborative, and seamless landscape in the future. Thank you very much for listening. Back to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yuvatana. So when you were painting your vision of the future, I was telling myself I'd like to be infected by your glowing attitude and your passionate optimism. So congratulations and thank you. Thank you very much. And let's give her a big round of applause. So this time, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to request Dr. Pham Quang Min, whom you have heard at the opening of this conference. As you have recalled, I introduced Dr. Min, the Assistant Director and Head of the Food, Agriculture, and Forestry Division of the ASEAN Economic Community Department of the ASEAN Secretariat. Dr. Min, please take the floor.
And because I also do not prepare the meaningful remarks like the grandmother's Dr. Margaret of CIN, right? So I just read that because I also know that is the 3-day for discussion, so take lots of time, right? And lots of discussion already there, so I do not want to repeat all, but I would like to thank again, right, the Department of Agriculture of Thailand for hosting these very important events. And of course, without the support from Climate Smart Land Use Projects and CIN Network, I believe that those support is quite valuable for us to be here to discuss about the recommendations, the practices, best practices, and also the lessons from the countries and from the international organization as well as local organization on how to promote the climate land use in ASEAN regions. From our side, right, we also try to record and also take notes of all the discussion today with your recommendation on how to move forward is this climate land use. I also believe that this is a cost-cutting issue, as mentioned by Dr. Margaret. This is a cost-cutting issue, and we try to promote the different sectors under our purview. Right, we work with the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries, and we also hope that land use will be one of the key agenda to be discussed by the member states in our sector. Right. So in this occasion, once again, I would like to thank all of you to be here with us for 3 days until now. And I also would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to deliver the remarks, closing remarks, and of course, opening remarks. And I hope that such a kind of event will be also continues to be organized with support from our partner, right? Here is the CSS, but I also expected that in the coming time, with support from the different partners, we also can organize the meetings, the conference focused on the land use. And of course, it also can contribute to the priority of ASEAN, like Dr. Margaret also mentioned, right? At this point in time, we also developed some document, and one of the important document is the ASEAN guideline on sustainable agriculture. And I do hope that with all of you, right, with your support, we also can successfully develop this document and submit to the minister next year for endorsement. And I hope that climate smart land use also one of the key topics under this document. But let's see, right? We hope that to see you soon again, and I look forward to working with you on all the initiatives. Once again, I'd like to thank you and have good days and take care during the COVID situation. And I hope to see you in person soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Min, for that very encouraging closing remarks. So friends, ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the close of our 3-day ASEAN conference on the policy and governance for climate smart land use. Before I will hand over the floor to Ms. Hannah Ruther, the Principal Advisor at GSAT Climate Smart Land Use Project, to reflect on the overall conference theme and to announce steps moving forward and officially close the conference, I would like to thank you for all your patience, your active participation, and for simply staying on and joining us for the last 3 days. We started out with 120 people, but now we're still half of that, and that's a good record, I would say. It has been quite a magnificent journey. I learned so much. So thank you very much for also allowing me this opportunity to journey with you. This time around, over to you, Hannah.
So, does my microphone work this time? That's the first question.
Yes.
Ha! Great. So we've solved the last technical barrier that we had during that conference. Yeah, very good late afternoon to everyone. It's good to be able to speak to you again, but I promise it will be the very final closing remarks for this conference. Well, we are looking back at 3.5 days of conference, as we just heard from several speakers, and I believe we touched upon many aspects that are relevant for policymakers and practitioners when aiming to promote climate smart solutions in food, agriculture, and forestry. Well, originally, I had planned to summarize the thematic journey that we took across the 3 days, reflecting about multi-level governance, discussing about participation and inclusion in policy making, and then ending up exploring how to create an enabling environment to mobilize private finance. Well, but I ditched that plan, listening to all the closing speakers that we had, because I believe there's really nothing more to add. I really think that our 2 closing panels captured the highlights and the key messages of this conference already beautifully. I cannot have done it better, surely not. And I really don't want to reiterate what has been said already. Overall, from what I have heard across these 3 days, I believe there are quite a number of lessons learned and good practices, but also challenges and needs, support needs that were identified in the discussions. So this kind of information is actually crucial for informing future exchange, cooperation, and policy making, and also support within ASEAN and its member states, as has been highlighted, of course, also by our closing speakers. I can assure you that GIZ will continue promoting knowledge exchange, capacity building, and collaboration on climate smart land use in the ASEAN context, and specifically, of course, related to our work with ASEAN, CRN, and ANGA. So what's the concrete way forward? Very practically speaking, we will of course share with you the presentations, all relevant materials from this event in the next few days. And of course, we'll also share the report once it is ready. I've heard questions from some participants about certificates of attendance. So we are not planning to send them out automatically to the 300 plus people who registered, but we are very happy to do so on demand. So if you require a certificate of attendance, please get in touch with the ASEAN CRN email address or my colleague Taufik's email address. I believe you all have those because you received the invitations through these channels. So please reach out to us if you need certificates. On the content of the conference, we will of course take a close look on the findings that emerged from the conference, and we will explore how we can address the interests and the needs that have arisen through the discussions under the ASEAN German Cooperation on Food, Agriculture and Forestry in the future, and in our concrete work that we have or planning for ASEAN, CRN and ANGA. The information that we've gathered through the conference will also help informing some concrete processes that are already ongoing, some of which have been mentioned also by Kun Margaret, by Dr. Min, for example, and the development of the volume 3 of the ASEAN CSA guidelines. And I believe you've heard an update on that on day 2 by Doc Romy. So we will take the lessons learned from this conference and immediately reflect how we can integrate that into existing and future activities. We have had a lot of thanks already, but please allow me to close this conference also with my personal thanks, because of course, a large conference like this is always also a participatory and multi-stakeholder exercise, right? So firstly, of course, my thank you goes out to our host, to the Department of Agriculture Thailand. Your leadership has always been paramount for our cooperation with and support for ASEAN CRN. So thank you very much for that. Similarly, we always are deeply grateful for the close and trustful cooperation with the ASEAN Secretariat and of course, specifically with the Food, Agriculture and Forestry Division. I would also like to express my deep gratitude to all the partners who contributed to this conference, either as co-facilitators or co-hosts of the parallel sessions, namely FAO, Asia DRA, CIFOR ICRAF, SEARCA together with Women Biz Philippines, YPART, RECOF TC, and Grow Asia with IISD. It is always a pleasure working with you. Of course, I also would like to thank all the speakers who provided their knowledge, their experiences, their view to this conference. I really cannot list them all, but please be assured that we appreciated your engagement very much. Thank you. Of course, big thanks to our talented graphic recorder, Tika. You will see the complete work that she produced for this conference with the documentation. And of course, I want to thank our wonderful moderator, Miko. You really helped us to make this event more lively, more vivid, despite the virtual setting and the technical difficulties that we faced. My personal and super big thank you goes, of course, to the organizational team, to the SEARCA team, especially Ms. Neria, the wonderful and surely exhausted tech team around JMARC, to Doc Pat, Doc Romy, and Elson, and all the other people involved in the organizational committee that I cannot list all individually. I want to thank the SEI team who are helping us in our ASEAN CRN Secretariat work. And of course, I want to thank my own team and here very especially Taufik and Dilla. Thank you all very much. And finally, I want to thank you, the audience, for joining this conference, engaging with the speakers and ourselves through Mentimeter, through chat. In the end, you are the champions who are promoting climate-friendly and climate-resilient solutions in ASEAN. And we are looking forward to accompanying you on this journey in the future. So with this, I would like to close our conference. I wish you all a good and restful evening. Stay safe and stay healthy, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye.